Good evening. I call the December 8th, 2021 City Council regular meeting to order. City Clerk Ben Lane, will you please conduct the roll call?
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor David Ortega.
Present.
Vice Mayor Tammy Caputi.
Here.
Council members Tom Durham.
Here.
Betty Janik.
Present.
Kathy Littlefield.
Present.
Linda Milhaven. Here. And Solange Whitehead.
Here.
City Manager Jim Thompson.
Here.
City Attorney Sherry Scott.
Here.
City Treasurer Sonia Andrews.
Here.
City Auditor Sharon Walker. Here. And the clerk is present. Thank you, Mayor.
Excellent. We have Scottsdale Police Sergeant Eric Bowles and Officer Christian Bailey, as well as firefighter Derek Owen, if anyone needs their assistance. Today we're honored for the Pledge of Allegiance to have the Boys and Girls Club of Greater Scottsdale, Piper Branch. Please come forward.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, thank you for being here. Please tell us your name and your school and your favorite subject.
Hello, my name is Kathleen Mcmahon. I attend Saguaro High School, and my favorite school subject is history.
I'm Addison Jones, and I go to Desert Mountain High School, and my favorite subject is English.
Hi, I'm Mia. I go to Fountain Hills High School. My favorite subject is U.S. history.
Thank you.
They're not close enough to them.
Well, this is the final meeting of council for the year 2021, and I hope everyone has a wonderful holiday, great time with family and friends. If you're looking for something terrific to do, we have many events. Please check out the Scottsdale program. The activities and events take place at various venues and destinations around the Old Town, and we encourage you to shop our businesses and meet our friendly merchants in Old Town. So our Scottsdale will continue till December 31st. For more information, please just search Scottsdale using any browser. Well, want to wish everyone a great holiday season and enjoy this beautiful weather. And we will now proceed with the meeting. The first part of our meeting will involve public comment. Public comment is reserved for Scottsdale citizens to comment on non-agendized items that are within the jurisdiction of our City Council. No official council action can be taken on any matter brought forward by the speakers, and they are invited to speak for 3 minutes. So I have opened public comment, and at this point I do not see that there is there is one, excuse me. There is one public comment, and it is in person. That is Daniel Ishak. If you could come forward, tell us your address, and you have 3 minutes.
.530 East Onyx Court. A few months ago, I sent an email to the council and to the mayor discussing the lack of decorum at the council meeting. Clearly, that email fell on deaf ears, at least with regard to the mayor. Last night, Councilwoman Whitehead correctly stated that no one on that dais has the only or the best solution to city challenges and issues. I'm assuming she felt compelled to state the obvious after the mayor wielded his gavel in an inappropriate manner to squelch the opinions of Vice Mayor Caputi. Mayor, the council sat and listened to you speak for 18 minutes and the topic at hand, which included quite a bit of background to bolster your direction to the city staff regarding the character plan. Vice Mayor Caputi waited to be recognized before speaking and was doing the exact thing you did. That is, to provide some background for what were to be her opinions and suggestions to the city staff, albeit in a much more abbreviated manner than you did. Apparently, because her views differ from yours, you tried to silence her under the guise of a matter of order. Yet you did not use that same authority against those that agree with your positions. In a word, that is shameful behavior from an elected official. Fortunately, we have the experience and knowledge of Councilwoman Milhaven to challenge your behaviors and the unbiased input from our city council to stop tyranny. I thank the council members who stood up for what is right to overrule your suppression of opposing ideas. It is shameful that it wasn't unanimous. Scottsdale deserves better than what we saw last night. If it were an isolated incident, I would not be here tonight, but it wasn't. Continued behavior like last night is going to lead to unfavorable coverage of the city in the press. As elected officials, your contribution of your time is not enough. Your conduct is important. Decorum is a basic expectation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. And you did not state your address, did you?
Yes, he did.
Okay, great. Thank you. Continuing, we will close public comment. And at this point, we will discuss consent agenda items 1 through 9A. We received 3 in-person and 1 telephonic for item number 9. So it is proper to open and hear public comment on any of the consent agenda items. Therefore, if I could call forward the speaker remotely for item number 9. Can you handle that, staff, please?
Yes, Mayor, we have David Mason on the line. Mr. Mason, you can hit *6 on your phone now to unmute.
Thank you. I am David Mason of 33217 North 61st Place, Scottsdale, Arizona. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Mayor and City Council members, I want to thank you for this public comment opportunity. I encourage adoption of ordinances 4527, 4528, and approval of the 2022 legislative agenda. I was on the Scottsdale City Short-Term Rental Working Group, whose recommendations led to proposed ordinances 4527 and 4528, and contributed to portions of the 2022 state legislative agenda addressing the impacts of short-term rentals and opposing legislation that would curtail the city's zoning authorities. Mayor, City Council members, and staff, you are to be commended for the most meritorious and noteworthy approach to short-term rentals and protecting the public safety of ordinary residents and the general public. Public safety is every resident's issue. Public safety is one of the reasons no one wants to live next to a short-term rental. Ordinances 4527 and 4528 highlight the primacy of public safety and Scottsdale residents' right to a decent, safe place to live. These ordinances are practical, reasonable, workable, and just plain common sense. These ordinances recognize that public safety means short-term rentals shouldn't become havens for nuisance behaviors threatening neighborhood safety and peace. These ordinances recognize that short-term rentals operating with little regard for residents' peace and safety are nuisances disrupting public safety and Scottsdale neighborhoods. Sadly, public safety has not seemed of much interest for some short-term rental owners, nor for the short-term rental industry. These ordinances make public safety and nuisance prevention of more interest to short-term rental owners and to the short-term rental industry, and hopefully more responsive to public safety and less disruptive. Thanks to you, Mayor, council members, and staff for all your hard work on this critical issue. Please continue to address short-term rental issues and possibly reconvening in some form another working group. Please consider the merits of similar actions by other cities and towns, particularly those not subjected to SB 1487 challenges and those surviving SB 1487 challenges. I know there are a number of cities and towns working similarly on issues as we are in Scottsdale. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Next, we have former Congressman Barry M. Goldwater, representing the Arizona Vacation Rental Association. Please come forward. Oh, certainly. We also have a Mark Bouvet in person as listed, so we could hear from Mr. Bouvet first, and then we'll continue.
My name is Mark Bouvet, address 8661 East Gale Road, Scottsdale. Honorable Mayor and council members, I am a small owner and operator of vacation rentals in both Phoenix and Scottsdale. I also volunteer to serve on the board of the Arizona Vacation Rental Association and have undertaken the task of quantifying the economic impact of vacation rentals on Arizona's tourism economy. Using the best data available and fundamental analysis techniques, I've extrapolated representative economic performance data for this sector. According to AirDNA, the same body of data that some of you have used, Scottsdale has 4,926 vacation rental units available as of today. Only 94% of these are whole home rentals, the other being fractional rooms for rent and whatnot inside a house. Another 12% are 30-day plus rentals, so are not true short-term rentals in the sense that we refer them, netting us to an actual total of 4,075 true short-term rentals in Scottsdale. This is 15% of the total of 27,000 units spread across our state. Since 2019, vacation rentals have produced over 10 million annual visitors to Arizona in each fiscal year. This year, the number is closer to 12 million, with 1.8 million of those annual visitors lodging right here in Scottsdale. Arizona Department of Revenue reports for the fiscal year ended June 30 of 2021, $600 million in online lodging revenues, which has produced $80 million in TPT tax revenues to our state, and approximately $12 million in TPT tax revenues to Scottsdale directly. Unfortunately, due to historic coding issues and practices, that money looks like hotel tax revenues as it comes into the city, and it's labeled as such. So Scottsdale is blind to the vacation rental tax revenue that's actually coming in. Additional visitor spending produces 5 times this amount in other tax revenues, with Scottsdale being an outsized beneficiary. Because whether you're staying in Gilbert or Glendale, and there are vacation rentals in every city across this valley, chances are a visit to Scottsdale is on your vacation to-do list. If tourism is important to Scottsdale and the city invests heavily in tourism promotion, then vacation rentals are important to Scottsdale. I urge you not to eviscerate vacation rentals in Scottsdale. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Tim Scarpino.
Honorable Mayor, council members, my name is Timothy Scarpino, 11004 North Miller Road. I work at Parsons Villas. We are also a small property management company that manages luxury short-term vacation rentals, Paradise Valley, Scottsdale, Phoenix. We agree that there are, unfortunately, as Dave Mason said, in the working group, we were shut out. We tried to be part of that. So we know that Arizona Vacation Rental was not allowed to be part of that working group. I know I requested to do that, and I think we were severely underrepresented in that working group. But I think we can all agree that problem houses and party houses and issues with vacation, those nuisance houses are not good for the neighborhoods. They're not good for short-term rental industry. And I think we can all agree that we want to rid them from our community. However, there are certainly other opportunities to correct this issue without adding new ordinances or adjusting the ordinances, particularly the time to respond. It is challenging. One of the things that we do is responsible vacation managers is we have private security that drives around. We have noise monitoring devices that are nowhere near as beneficial as we have all been led to believe. They fall offline. When we contact guests for noise violations from these noise monitoring devices, they're just watching TV. Obviously, there are exceptions to the rule, but we take many, many proactive steps to be good neighbors in the community. And we as Parsons Villas and Arizona Vacation Rental Association want to work together with the government to solve the problem of these nuisance houses. We just don't feel that these two ordinances are beneficial towards solving the problem. And what's going to end up happening is those that are the nuisance houses are going to go underground, and they're not going to be under the same set of rules. So I'm afraid that these may have unintended consequences of putting the good players at a disadvantage and putting the bad players at a better advantage because they're not going to follow any of the rules. That's all I have. Thank you. I appreciate your time, and thank you for working through this issue, and we're excited to get rid of the nuisance houses too, because it's bad for our community and it's bad for the vacation rental industry. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Barry M Goldwater Jr. Good to see you.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, thank you for allowing this testimony, and I appear here today because I'm concerned that the City of Scottsdale proposed Ordinance 4527 contains provisions that are perhaps unnecessary, counterproductive, and contrary to the law. There are problems out there, and those of us in this business want to work with everyone to clean that up. I think the vast majority of rental units are law-abiding, well-intended, and obey the law. But in this case, SB 1350, which went into effect 2017, already prohibits local governments from imposing restrictions on vacation rental units based solely on their classification, use, or occupancy. In other words, cities may not impose vacation rental properties or short-term rentals any rule that does not apply to all other residential rental property. The only exception is that based on local governments may impose rules that are necessary to protect the public safety and health. Proposal number 4527 conflicts with this rule in several ways by regulating short-term or vacation rentals without imposing the same requirements on homeowners who offer their homes as long-term rentals. SB 1350, was passed in 2017, permits cities to require an owner or her designee to respond to complaints in a timely manner in person, over the phone, or by mail. It does not authorize cities to require a person to be physically present within 60 minutes, nor is this requirement tailored toward protecting the public health and safety. An emergency contact person cannot be expected to put an immediate end to a nuisance, and it would not be unlikely that an emergency contact person would make it to a home while a nuisance is still occurring. The police are the best suited to respond quickly and to deal swiftly with nuisance and complaints. By forcing owners to be on call in the event of an ordinance violation is inappropriate. Owners are not police. The proposed adoption of Ordinance 4527 violates state law and is not necessary. Rather than punishing innocent property owners and adding another level of unnecessary bureaucracy, the city should enforce its already existing laws against specific nuisances, properties, when they occur. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So we'll close public comment, and we can open comment. I see Councilwoman Whitehead on the subject.
Yes, I was just going to ask staff to pull this from the consent agenda and do a presentation.
Thank you. Councilwoman Janik.
I had the same request. Could we pull it from consent and put it on regular? Thank you.
Certainly. Well, we have our open subject, which is the consent agenda items 1 through 9A, and excluding consent agenda number 9. Do I have a motion on those consent agendas?
Mayor, I'll make a motion to approve items 1 through 9A on the consent agenda with the exception of item 9.
I second.
Thank you. We have a motion and we have a second. Any discussion? Okay, please register your vote concerning the consent agenda items. Thank you. That was unanimous. We will then proceed to our regular agenda items, which would be, in this case, the agenda item number 9, 10, 11, and 12. They will be handled individually, and I'm asking Assistant City Manager Brent Stockwell to make the presentation as requested. Thank you.
Mayor Ortega, members of the City Council, I'm one of your Assistant City Managers, Brent Stockwell. I've had the pleasure of being your staff person that worked with the short-term rental working group over 12 weeks and 6 meetings last spring, and then also was here in support of Council members Janik and Millhaven, who presented to you on this subject on July 1st, and the Council unanimously directed us to move forward with the working group recommendations and report back to you on a quarterly basis, which we did on November 9th. And we went through these draft ordinances in detail with you that evening. We also shared all this information with all the members of the working group, and also an interested party list of everyone that has ever contacted us about this issue and wanted to be involved. And we also sent, as we mentioned to you that night, information out to the government relations representatives for Airbnb, Expedia, Verbo, and then also Avra at that time. And all of that is intended to make sure that we're having as open and transparent process as we go through all this. As you know as well, you also sent a letter to the Arizona legislature letting them know of the importance of this issue to Scottsdale residents. And we know that you have heard from hundreds of residents in the community concerned about both those of appropriate short-term rental owners that are certainly supportive of what they do, but the vast majority of them concerned about owners of other properties that were not properly obeying Scottsdale's laws and asking for additional help from this. So one of the recommendations that you had was to evaluate whether Scottsdale's ordinances could be strengthened to eliminate loopholes and improve the ability to enforce. And of course, as we talked about in the working group and on the 1st and then again on November 9th, we are all doing this within the authority that was granted by the state of Arizona for local governments to address this issue. Let me talk about each one of them briefly, and I also have Deputy City Attorney here, Luis Santea, who's able to answer any detailed questions that you may have about the ordinance. He was the drafter of that along with your team that's supporting this. And also Commander Scott Smith is also present. He's the downtown district commander, and many of the short-term rentals in Scottsdale are there, so he's very familiar with the response. And also his team also were the ones that went out in the neighborhoods with noise monitors to help us identify those levels. So two things. The first is the vacation rental ordinance, and this is the only thing that applies only to short-term rentals. And that requires a 1-hour response time in the event that a police officer has to go out to a property in response to an emergency, and they are calling someone that the owner has identified as the emergency contact, and that's something where the police officer needs the help of that emergency contact to get that situation under control. And we could, we've talked before about, kind of the details of that situation. This is not something new. The City of Chandler also had a 1-hour response time in their ordinance. That was one of the things that we uncovered when we went out and looked at all the other ordinances of all the other cities in the state on this. So it is also something that's not unusual. We have a false alarm ordinance. So lots of people have alarms at their home. A few people don't maintain them, and those cause false alarms. And what we've required in that situation is someone's got to come out in a half an hour to turn off that alarm so it's not a nuisance for the neighborhood. So, we thought a very reasonable requirement here to do this for short-term rentals when a police officer, not anybody, but a police officer goes out and says, I need the help of the owner or representative to get this situation under control. I think that's entirely reasonable, and of course, if you never have a problem at your home, you're never going to have that need for that to be in place. Then the second one, I need to be very clear on this. This is the nuisance party and unruly gathering ordinance. And this doesn't just apply to short-term rentals. This applies to short-term rentals. This applies to long-term rentals. This applies to single-family residences, which most of us live in. And if we choose to have a party that disturbs the peace and quiet of the neighbors around us after 10 p.m. at night in particular, we have given our police officers a little bit more authority to address that and set what that standard is. As we discussed on November 9th, it also defines habitual offenders. Those were people that, I believe, not just once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times we've had to go on and do a civil citation against them, and they've been found responsible so that we can hold them we can assess higher levels of penalties and responsibilities. You may recall back in November 9th, we also talked about an innovation that we had tried previously, the police service fee, and this ordinance will also eliminate that experiment of the police service fee and use the more standard practice that we use, which is a civil citation process that goes to city court. So if one of these situations happens, they will have their day in court, and a judge will decide that matter. As we also discussed on November 9th, it is increasing the minimum fines. The concept here was making sure that we were using all the authority that the state legislature had already given us for that, and also providing mechanisms in place, such as those suggested by the industry, for mitigation or reduction or suspension of those fines if they implement the best practices, such as those mentioned tonight. So we certainly think we've gone through a very thorough process on this. We certainly have done all the analysis to make sure that we're being very consistent and with the law while continuing to advocate for increased local control, as you've directed us to do. And that's why we're here. That's why we're here tonight. Thank you. Oh, and I've already mentioned the community involvement. So here's what we're asking for tonight. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Millhaven.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Brent, for your presentation. Gentlemen, I'm a little surprised to hear that you felt you were left out of the process, because all of the meetings were open to the public and all of the meetings included public comment opportunities. So I'm really surprised to hear that you felt that you didn't have an opportunity to input in that. I understand that a 30 show up in 60 minutes may be a burden, but as Brent explained, if the police show up and the tenants aren't going to respond, then I think the owner needs to take some responsibility. I also think that it puts the responsibility on the owner to make sure that they're not advertising that 20 people can be there where you're going to have a party, and that the owner makes sure that the folks that they're renting to understand. And we talked, I don't know if we've finished doing this, but we talked in the task force about doing a, good neighbor. Remember, you're in a neighborhood and good neighbors behave this way, and so please, watch your noise and don't put your trash in the street and all the things that we see the bad actors are doing to remind tenants to please be good neighbors when you're visiting our neighborhoods. And so I would hope that it would happen not very often, that someone would need to be called if the owner is doing a good job in the way they're advertising their property. Because, right, talking with folks in the industry, they say, our intention is to rent to families, and maybe a couple of families, not to have these big party houses. And so I'm all for having the owner have a little bit of responsibility in terms of screening their tenants and also informing their tenants about how we expect them to behave when they're in our neighborhoods. I was surprised to hear you say, sir, that you have private security driving around. That would suggest that it wouldn't be a problem to show up within 60 minutes. So while I understand it may put a bit of a burden on, we did talk about, too, when we levy a fine, and Brent talked about it on one of the slides, that if someone shows a good faith effort to try to address the issue, we're certainly going to be responsive to that and try to cooperate with the owner. So I do think I'd like to move forward with this, and so I'm going to make a motion to adopt Ordinance 4527 and Ordinance number 4528.
I'll second that motion.
Great. I see three other requests to speak. Councilwoman Janik, then Councilwoman Whitehead.
Thanks for that great report. I'm glad you gave us clarification you did, especially on the 1 hour response time. And I have to tell you that I was the one that recommended the 1 hour response time. First of all, it's in Chandler, and it's helped get the situation under control, and it has not been a foul of the law as far as we know. I'm also aware that these rules exist in other cities, and they work. And because they work, I think it's advantageous for us to adopt them. And you have to realize that if you have one party house on a block, it affects many of the neighbors because the noise disturbs the children, the babies, the parents, etc. So we need to put the responsibility back on the owner and the people renting at that location. And I think this is a good way to attack the problem. I do not believe we're afoul of the law. And I guess the other comment I would like to make is I understand when you say this is the amount of money that is brought in by short-term rentals, and I accept that. But I would hope that you would accept that the hotels have lost business because of short-term rentals. So it's a balancing act. While people in the audience may think, wow, look at the money we'll lose if we clamp down on this. In fact, it's not one-to-one parity. It doesn't work that way. If we didn't have the short-term rentals, our hotels would probably be back to where they were. So a lot of that money is gained back. So that argument, I question it. I'd like to look at the numbers. Pretty much that's my comments.
Councilwoman Whitehead, and then Councilmember Durham.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I would say that peace and quiet and enjoyment of your neighborhood is priceless. That said, we definitely appreciate quality short-term rentals, and I don't think that I or anybody else wants to end that. I want to thank Brent and my colleagues on council and the staff and Luis Santiago for the work you've done to bring this forward. The best way, actually I'm going to quote Mr. Scarpino, I think is how I agree that bad short-term rentals, they're really hurting our communities, but they're also hurting the short-term rental industry, and they're also hurting your profits, your bottom line. So we're all in the same boat. We want to get rid of these guys. And the best way to avoid a mishmash of different codes in different cities is to aggressively fight at the state level to protect neighborhoods. But since we don't have that, and we're here today, I would say that the 1 hour enforcement's not going to hurt the good short-term rental owners. It's people who don't murder people aren't bothered by laws that don't allow you to. So I think you're in good shape. I think that we need this because of the problems we're having. And so, while I appreciate your comments, let's keep working together, but I definitely support these ordinance changes, so thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Durham and Councilwoman Littlefield.
Thank you, Mayor. Looking at Mr. Goldwater's letter, he quotes from the Arizona statutes that say we have the ability to require a designee to respond in a timely manner. And that seems to me an hour is a timely manner. You can get almost anywhere in Scottsdale within less than an hour. And it also allows us to require that response be in person, over the phone, or by email. So those are stated as alternatives. So as I see it, we're requiring a timely response, less than an hour, and we're requiring it in person, which the statute seems to support our ability to do that. You have any comments on that?
Mayor, Councilmember Durham, members of the council, I'll make a quick comment on that, and then looks like Deputy City Attorney wants to make a comment as well. There's one item from the staff report that we did to clarify this, and you may recall that we discussed this a little bit on November 9th because we heard a concern from one of the government relations representatives from one of the online lodging marketplaces that they preferred Phoenix's ordinance that allowed you to call or text. And so of course we said last time and earlier that if a police officer has to show up, then we think the owner of the home should also be there. But what we wanted to say, and I'm quoting from the report, if a police officer is on site responding to an emergency, the emergency contact needs to be physically present to enter the house or backyard to control the situation. And this is the point, this next sentence to your point. In the event an emergency contact responds to the officer by phone or text or email and is able to resolve the situation within 1 hour, it's highly unlikely that they would be cited for failure to respond to it in person. So it's just a very logical argument too. So if you're able to get it done within that time period, it's really, the problem is only in the situation where we try to contact someone and nobody responds within an hour. So I thought that was responsive to your statement, and I'll yield to Deputy City Attorney.
Mayor and members of the council, the legal issue that Congressman Goldwater brought up was he was stating that he believed that the emergency contact provision violated state law because it didn't apply to owner-occupied or long-term rentals. In the state law that governs short-term vacation rentals, there's two different sections. There's one public safety section where the city can impose laws unique to short-term rentals, such as issues such as transportation, some public health and safety type regulations, if they demonstrate or the city demonstrates a public safety need. That same section also says that the city can require an emergency contact. The section that Councilman Durham referred to is the complaint contact section. So the city can actually require two different contact information, so emergency contacts and complaint. And there's no restrictions in the section on emergency contacts what we can require. We just have to demonstrate that there's a need. In the ordinance that you're going to adopt or are considering adopting tonight, there's a statement about the number of police calls that have occurred at short-term vacation rentals. And it's over 1,200 if I recall correctly. So that seems to be a very significant public safety reason for requiring emergency contacts to respond within an hour. And it is covered by a section or authorized by a section that does not apply to long-term rentals or owner-occupied. So that there is a distinction between the two type things. Just wanted to provide that clarification.
Thank you for that clarification.
And if I may go further, because that ordinance was through October, and it had 1,821, I believe was the number. We got updated numbers today through the end of November, and just for the month of November alone, there were 175 calls for service related to short-term rentals into the Scottsdale Police Department, and that resulted in 5 notices of violation, for the nuisance party and unruly gathering ordinance. That was on top of 9 the month prior, and we finally now have the numbers on that. So believe me, there has been a consistent effort for these notices of violation, and this ordinance only helps your police department respond to that. So thank you.
Next, we have Councilwoman Littlefield.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Brent. I'd also like to thank Councilwoman Milhaven and Councilwoman Janik for their work and their efforts in having this happen. I do support this. I think a lot of work, a lot of study, a lot of legalese, if you will, has gone into this to make sure that it is tight and that it is accurate and that it is appropriate. So I support this. I think the rules are needed, and I think the numbers justify that and prove that they are needed. The calls that I get from neighbors who are awake at 3 o'clock in the morning because of marijuana parties ramaging through their neighborhoods is not what we want here. People have a right to expect a certain medium of peace and quiet in their neighborhoods and in their homes, and when that doesn't happen, then we need to step up and do something. We need to protect our neighborhoods, our citizens, and I think this is a common sense way to address the actual real issues and not go outside of those boundaries and protect citizens, neighborhoods, and the peace and quiet that they deserve. So I will be supporting this. Thank you, and thank you both for your help on this. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. I also support the resolutions as stated. By the time a notification is made, there's already a police report in progress. It's important to know that. That means it's already been elevated to a point where we need and want accountability. And of course, every time an officer goes to a property, they are in potentially harm's way. So we are doing our job and our responsibility to both for the neighborhood as well as the owner. Accordingly, I don't see any other comments from council. We have a motion, we have a second to approve the vacation rental nuisance party ordinance amendments, adopt ordinances 4527, 4528. Please register your vote. Thank you. Unanimous. Next, we will move on to item number 10. Item number 10 is a regular agenda item whereby the Arizona legislative agenda is discussed and presented by management. And in this case, Shane Stone is the Management Assistant Associate presenting our look ahead and requesting our review and action. Thank you.
Thank you, and good evening, Mayor Ortega and members of the City Council. As the Mayor said, I'm Shane Stone, Management Associate to the City Manager. Tonight I'll be taking you through our proposed 2022 state legislative agenda. Government Relations will be tracking legislative activity throughout the entire session and reporting to Council with important updates. It is important, however, with the importance of decisions that are made at the state capitol and the pace at which things can change in that building, to approach this session with an agenda that is clear on issues that can significantly impact the city of Scottsdale. In 2022, we will see the second session of the 55th legislature, and that will begin on January 10th. The upper chamber, the Senate, will be led by Senate President Karen Fan of Prescott, and the House will be led by Speaker Rusty Bowers of Mesa, with partisan splits of 16-14 and 31-29, respectively, of course, with both houses holding, the Republican Party holding the majority. There are 3 legislative districts with a connection to Scottsdale. Legislative District 23 includes almost all of Scottsdale north of Thomas Road and is represented by Senator Ugenti Rita, as well as Representatives Kavanaugh and Chaplick. Legislative District 24, including the far southern reaches of the city, is represented by Senator Alston, Representative Shaw, and Assistant Minority Leader Longden. And Legislative District 28 has just a small portion that comes east of Scottsdale Road, but will have more Scottsdale residents in it or in the district similar to it after redistricting, and it is represented by Senator Marsh as well as Representatives Butler and Liguori. Our legislative agenda is built around three core principles which guide our support and opposition of various legislative proposals. First, to respect Scottsdale's unique character and culture. Second, to preserve local funding. And third, to oppose the preemptions of local authority. We'll be going over our recommended support and opposition of various legislative proposals by area of policy. There are, however, several proposals which stand out as particularly impactful towards our mission of simply better service, which leaves them highlighted as key positions. In this area, we have two proposals to support. First, legislation which enhances our capabilities to address the negative impacts of short-term rental properties and develops a more level playing field between the short-term rental industry and the tourism industry. And second, legislation allowing the city easier access to Water Infrastructure Finance Authority, or WIFA financing. Access to this funding could amount to significant savings in building and maintaining our water infrastructure. We also have three key areas of opposition. First, a legislation that would limit or curtail the city's current zoning authority, particularly in residential areas. Second, to legislation that would reduce or eliminate key revenue streams for the city, including state shared revenue. And third, we oppose unfunded mandates to the city. We also have areas of legislative support or opposition within specific areas of state policy, the first of which being economic vitality and tourism. We support policies that enhance the state's reputation as a medical care destination. Medical tourism is a significant economic driver for Scottsdale. We support policies, we support additional job creation measures, including training and development. Our educated and well-trained workforce is an advantage when seeking investment into our community, and we'd relish the opportunity to expand on that advantage. And we support the revitalization of IT systems, including infrastructure and safety enhancements, and lowering information technology costs. Next, in local government finance, we support the stability of public pensions and reducing unfunded pension debt. Scottsdale, of course, has been a leader in this space through our reduction of unfunded liabilities and pensions. We support the continued viability of highway user revenue funds, or HERF funds, to fund infrastructure projects. We support changes to the Major Events Fund, which would remit monies back to local governments for their support of mega events that bring in regional and statewide benefit. And in accordance with our key position to oppose the elimination of key revenue streams, we oppose the elimination of the privilege tax on the renting of real property for residential purposes and the reduction or elimination of the speculative builder classification of construction sales tax. And similarly, we oppose changes to the construction sales tax which do not equitably return revenues to the location of the construction activity. Construction taxes should be remitted to communities that take on the costs associated with that construction. In the area of transportation, we have three potential proposals to support. First, the continued viability of the State Aviation Fund, including provisions to return funds to the airport where the fuel is sold. We all know how important the Scottsdale Airport is to the community and to the local economy. We support the extension of the Proposition 400 regional sales tax by bringing the extension to a countywide vote of the people. And we support the continuation of Arizona's leadership in the development of safe autonomous vehicles and devices. This is an area where we've already seen significant investment occur in Scottsdale. In quality of life issues, we really are following two of the major works of this city council. On the tail of the non-discrimination ordinance, we support legislation to prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And in line with all of the work being done on affordable housing, we support legislative action that supports local and regional efforts on housing. In public safety, we support efforts that would allow us to limit firework uses and overall lessen the fire risk. This is good local control policy anyways, but with the value that we place in the McDowell, Sonora, and Preserve, it's especially important in Scottsdale. And we also support legislation that enhances our ability to preserve public safety, Conversely, we oppose legislation that would impair our effectiveness at maintaining public safety, as well as public safety preemption on a range of topics, including risk reduction measures, photo enforcement, and certificates of necessity for ambulance transportation. In preservation and environmental planning, we follow the value in our new general plan of conserve and preserve the environment. This is done by supporting programs that minimize adverse environmental impacts and ensure energy and water are used responsibly. We support increased resources to the Arizona Department of Agriculture for the treatment of non-native invasive weeds. We support legislative efforts to bring about changes in forest management to increase forest health, improve water yields, and reduce catastrophic wildfire risk. We oppose legislation that would impact our long-established ordinances and standards regarding native plants and sustainable development. Finally, in the area of water services and facilities, we support positions that strengthen the state's water management, including the 1980 Groundwater Management Act and the ability of local water providers such as Scottsdale Water to manage, plan, conserve, and acquire water resources for our customers, of course, to preserve our way of life well into the future. That concludes the presentation of the 2022 state legislative agenda. The action requested this evening is to approve the agenda, and I'd yield to any questions you may have.
At this time, I would recognize public comment. So we would open public comment. I am told that there is no public comment. Therefore, I will close the public comment on this item and open to council questions or discussion. Councilwoman Whitehead, then Councilmember Durham.
Thank you for the presentation. Great priorities. So there has been in the news some talk about preempting our ability to limit, for instance, electric bikes in the preserve. How do we need to add that as part of this, or does it fit it? It could fit in a couple areas, public safety, as well as under the preservation priorities. But I wonder if we want to, if my colleagues feel it might be worthwhile, or if staff has any guidance on adding specific language on that. Thanks.
Thank you. Mayor Ortega, Councilwoman Whitehead, members of the council. On that, I would go back to our core principles, which include opposing the preemption of local authority. So of course, any preemption of local authority is going to be opposed by the city with reasonable communication to the city council on those issues.
Okay, so if that does come, if that turns into a bill in some committee, we can immediately, without council approval, go after it. Okay, that works for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Durham, then Councilwoman Janik.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. This is a very long list. Are there any things on it in particular that you expect to bubble to the top and be more likely than others that we should be keeping an eye on?
Thank you, Councilmember Durham, for that question. So here I would go to the key positions. Certainly we expect short-term rentals to be a topic this year and something that's going to bubble to the top, as well as WIFA financing. We very much expect that would be legislation that would be run this year. So the key positions are areas where we expect to see something happen. I would say those are the most likely. Does that answer the question?
Yes, that's a good answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Janik, Councilmember Millhaven, and then Councilwoman Littlefield.
Thank you, Shane, for that very informative presentation. I do have a question for clarification. In front of me, I have the letter that I believe we will be sending off to the state that summarizes all of these ideas and positions, and yet you went through in quite a bit more detail. Does the state get both the letter and the detail, or just the letter? I was just curious.
Thank you for that question, Councilwoman Janik. I believe what you were referring to was the legislative agenda
Yes.
With front and back? Yes. So that is, the text that you saw, at least on the screen tonight, is the same text that's on here. And that will be shared certainly with legislative leadership and Scottsdale legislators at our legislative breakfast. And it's something that that government relations will be able to carry into the offices of legislators. So it will have all of the text that you've seen with.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Littlefield?
Thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. I would ask that as you watch what the legislature is doing and what's happening and all that kind of good stuff, if you would pay extra special close attention to issues that involve water use here in the state of Arizona, and any negative changes to Scottsdale that might be happening, make sure that we have a very quick and close announcement or let us know if anything changes so that we can stay on top of that issue. That's important to all of us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Councilwoman Littlefield.
Thank you.
Councilmember Milhaven?
Thank you. I'd move to accept and approve the city's Scottsdale 2022 state legislative agenda.
I'll second that.
Okay, I will add my comments as well, and do support the motion and the second. My question just relates to the water resource issue. It is major. We are basically at, stage 1.5, as I call it. There is some state funding, approximately $100 million that was placed in the budget for this fiscal year. And just want to know that as we track that Scottsdale gets, our proportionate consideration. It dealt with a lot of compensation to agriculture and so forth. But with that, please, we have a motion and a second. Please register your vote. Thank you. Thank you, unanimous. Appreciate your work.
Thank you, Mayor Ortega and members of the council.
Well, our next item is number 11, fiscal year 2021 annual financial audit presented by Sharon Walker, City Auditor, and Brittany Williams. Heinfeld, Meach, and Company have their audit report. Thank you. Proceed.
Mayor and members of the council, I'll be speaking from the table here tonight so that Brittany can do her presentation from the podium. Presenting audit results at a public council meeting has apparently been recognized as somewhat of a best practice because there's actually a new state law just passed this last session that now requires that to happen. And that law also requires that the CPA that performs the audit be the one to present the audit results. So Brittany will be presenting the results, and then after her overview, there's one other part of the law that I'll be addressing, and then I'll present the audit results. So Brittany, if you'll advance this slide for me. There's one more thing I wanted to provide a little bit of background. For the public and for the newer city council members who haven't seen the annual financial audit report before, the charter actually requires the council to designate a CPA to perform the audit. The council's assign that responsibility to the city auditor, and my office selected Heinfeld Meach to conduct the audit for the city. It's actually the city treasurer's accounting staff that prepares the extensive sets of financial reports that Heinfeld Meach audits. And then after the audit, we present those results to the audit committee, and they receive these financial reports at their November 15th meeting. So I'll turn it over to Brittany and let her summarize what this year's results were.
Great. Thanks, Sharon. Good evening, Mayor Ortega, members of the council. Thank you so much for having me here this evening. As Sharon mentioned, on November 15th, I did present to the audit committee the results of our audit reports. There's several of them. We kind of went through them at the audit committee. There's in total, we've given about 18 different reports so far, and we still have 2 left to do. So we're just going to give you a brief summary here. But what you see on the screen right now is our actual independent auditor's report, and we give an audit opinion on the city's annual comprehensive financial report, which is that really big financial statement one, as well as all of the 7 component units of the city, which include the 5 CFDs, the Municipal Property Corporation, and the Scottsdale Preserve Authority. They all receive an individual auditor opinion, and each of the opinions that we provided were clean opinions. We call those unmodified opinions, meaning we didn't have to not opine or modify our opinion in any way. They were clean, they were the best you can get, so that's really good. So that's kind of what this first slide is covering. We also have some communications that we're required to give to those charged with governance, and we went through this as well at the audit committee. It's called a communication to governance letter, and it's required under statements of auditing standards for auditors to give. And it goes through a number of different things. It talks about estimates that management has made in the financial statements, if there were any difficulties encountered during the audit, if we made any adjustments, if we had any disagreements with management, any fraud, anything like that, that would have all been in this letter. We issue one of these letters for the city financial statements as well as all 7 component units as well. So 8 of these letters. There were no issues. There was nothing to note. It was a very standard letter, and you can read through it. It's a pretty easy read in just a few pages. So if you wanted to see the full version of that, we presented it at the audit committee. We also do something called a single audit, where we audit the federal awards that the city spends during the year. So fiscal year 21 saw a lot of changes with COVID-19 funding, the CARES Act, the CRISA Act, the ARPA Act. There's all these different acts that have just given all of the municipalities a lot of money. And so it came with its own challenges and complications, but the city has spent about $27 million in federal awards for just fiscal year 21. So we do an audit on that, and included in that single audit report is a report on internal control. So we look at lots of different things with internal controls as far as financial reporting, all the different areas, cash, investments, revenues, expenditures, capital assets, debt. We look at a lot of different things. And we did find one deficiency in the financial statement report when we were looking through it that we had to report here. We also, in our practice and guided by standards, have to do an evaluation of everything that we find and determine whether or not it rises to the level of inclusion in this report. And there's different levels as well. It can be a significant deficiency, it could be non-compliance, it can be a material weakness. The one that we had was a significant deficiency. So in essence, what happened was the equity balance for your joint venture in the SHROG reported was an error. It was just a clerical error. Somebody grabbed the wrong line item. It grabbed another municipality. So it was a very unfortunate situation. Doesn't happen, but people make mistakes. So that's really all that was. But we were required to report that. So you would see that in this report. As far as the federal programs that we audited, we did not have any findings there. So a lot of federal money spent. We have to do a risk assessment on which federal programs we're going to test every year. We rotate them. There were no findings there, no issues. Everything looked clean. And we always have to present a status on the prior audit findings. And last year we had a finding on the housing voucher cluster, which was a federal award, and it was fully corrected this year. So that's something to definitely note with the city. Anytime we do have an issue that we have to note in this report, it's fully corrected almost immediately. And in the next report, we give that status and we're able to say that it's been fully corrected. We also issue a report for some compliance related to the highway user revenue funds. We test those expenditures, make sure they're spent in accordance with state statute, and we give a one-page report on that. Here's that accountant's report. It's not an audit opinion, it's just a report. Everything was fine with that. And then we also have, as I mentioned, 2 more reports that we're going to be doing in the spring. That is the HUD report for housing type issues, and then the annual expenditure limitation reports. So it's a full year of audit and fun for us, and we get to come out and see Sharon and her team and Anna and her team, and several times during the year, and it's always a pleasure to come out and work with everybody and see everybody. And we gave a little bit more detail at the audit committee meeting on different types of things that we tested this year and the way that we look at things that we change up. So yeah, with that, I'll go ahead and just open it for questions or hand it back over to Sharon for her final pieces.
If there are no questions about the financial statements, I'll just cover one additional requirement that was added in that same law that requires the audit presentation at a public meeting. And it's highlighted here in tan on the slide that's showing. And Brittany, if you'll go to the next slide for me. This is what that particular section says, and it looks like maybe subsection B is the connection to the audit presentation. The law became effective September 29th. That was after the fiscal year that Heinfeld Meach was auditing. And so I reviewed the city's currently available training, not as an audit, but just reading through the training that's available, did not find any issues. So the next slide, please. So the requested action today is, as recommended by the Council's Audit Committee, to accept the fiscal year 2020-21 financial reports as submitted by Heinfeld Meach, and to adopt resolution number 12342.
Thank you. I see one request to speak. Councilwoman Littlefield.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd just like to say, as chairman of the audit committee, working with Sharon for a number of years and with my fellow auditor council members, Solange and Ben, I'd like to say thank you. The auditor and her staff do fine work, exceptional work for the city, I believe. And they have work standards that are extremely high, and they live up to them. And I believe that we are very, very lucky to have an audit staff that works for the city, that checks the city with the attitude of not finding and condemning, but finding and fixing or just making better as we go through all of our various audits in the city. And I think it's the attitude that should happen, because that's how we improve as a city and we get better. So thank you. And thank you for your work also, because you keep us all up in line. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I will move for acceptance of the 2020-21 financial audit reports submitted by the city's external auditors, Heinfeld Meach and Company PC, and adopt resolution 12342 to demonstrate compliance with ARS 41-1494.
Second.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, please register your vote. Thank you. Well done. Our next regular agenda item is item number 12, which is the fiscal year end 2021 financial reports. Sonia Andrews, City Treasurer, is coming to us with that report.
Okay, good evening, Mayor Ortega, and good evening, council members. The annual report is audited, it's done, it's published, and it's posted on the city's website. And I wanted to say that the annual financial report is a very important document, not just because it's audited and 210 pages long, but because it is a document that our citizens, our rating agencies, and our bond investors, it provides them an insight into the city's financial functioning of the city. In essence, it's like a report card that tells us how we're doing financially. Next. In tonight's presentation, I will highlight some numbers from our year-end financial report and also let you know what it says about the city's financial health. But before I begin my presentation, I would like to take a moment to recognize and thank my accounting director, Anna Hanthon, and her accounting staff for all the work that they've done. It takes a lot of hard work, a lot of specialized knowledge, and a lot of dedication to keep our books accurate throughout the year, to get through the audit and get a clean audit and produce a 210-page annual financial report. The other thing is that our annual financial report has earned the GFOA, the National GFOA Award for Excellence in Financial Reporting for 48 consecutive years. We should be very, very proud of that. And we'll be submitting this report for the award again this year. Next. For the benefit of our audience who may not know, the city's fiscal year ends on June 30th. It takes about 2 months for us to get through year-end procedures so that we can produce some preliminary results for council. We presented preliminary results for the general fund on August 26th, and I'm happy to report that there's no change from those preliminary results that we reported. We then take another couple months to prepare for the audit, get through the audit, present the audit to the audit committee, and here we are tonight, the final step of this year-end process, to present the year-end financial results to council. Next. In order to understand our financial report and how it shows our fiscal health, I need to spend a little bit of time to go over some basics on what we look for when assessing the city's fiscal health. First, we look at financial condition. Do our revenues cover our expenses? Are we spending within our means? Do we have a strong cash position? Do we have enough cash to pay our bills on time? Or do we have cash flow problems? We also look at financial capacity. Do we have a manageable debt burden, or are we over-leveraged? Do we have the ability to fund and finance our capital needs, or do we have to push those to the future? We look at our financial resiliency. Do we have sufficient reserves and budget flexibility to withstand economic downturns and unforeseen events without undue pressures on our financials and our finances? Our year-end report shows that the City of Scottsdale is financially strong and in very good shape. So let me go through some numbers that will show that. Next. First of all, our revenues. If you remember at the start of fiscal year 2021, that's all the way back to July of 2020, we were 3 months into the pandemic. There was significant uncertainty as to where our finances would be through the pandemic, the recession. We did not know where our revenues would end up. Fortunately for us, our revenues came in stronger than expected and stronger than the prior years across all funds. Yes, we received federal stimulus dollars, which boosted our revenues, but we also had a strong recovery and economic activity that generated taxes and other revenues. On our enterprise funds, we had, back in July of 2020 through September of 2020, we had virtually little to no monsoon season. So we had higher than expected water usage, which boosted our revenues. And also on the airport side, we also experienced much higher activity. So overall, we ended the year with revenue numbers as presented on this slide and positive revenue growth. Next slide. On the expenditure side, we managed our spending very closely, again, because there was so much uncertainty as to what revenues we would end up with for the year. While some of our expenditure categories increased, other categories came in lower, so overall, our total expenditures for the year were either unchanged from the prior year or lower than the prior year as shown on this table. So overall, for the fiscal year, we were spending within our means. Next. We also improved our balance sheet. We increased our investments in capital assets. We now have over $6 billion invested in various infrastructure, facilities, and other capital assets. We increased our general fund cash and investments to almost $160 million. That improves our liquidity position and our cash flows. And we also increased our unrestricted net position. That is like our equity. Next. We continue to maintain a very manageable debt profile. And this chart shows our various debt obligations. During fiscal year 2021, we issued $51.2 million in new GEO bonds for our 2019 bond program. We also issued $311 million in refunding bonds, which achieved $27 million in savings over the next 10 to 16 years. We did not issue any other debt aside from that. And to address our pension liabilities, we set aside $40 million, which we contributed this fiscal year to pay down our PSPRS unfunded liability. Next. The financial report will also show you that we maintained our reserves throughout 2021. Our financial policies require specific reserve levels as shown on this slide. Reserves are becoming more and more important as we have more and more uncertainties, and reserves are really important to ensure financial resiliency so we can weather economic downturns and handle emergencies and unforeseen events. Next. And finally, we maintained our strong bond rating. The city has a AAA rating, which is the highest rating that can be achieved, and we should be very proud of that. And we have the highest rating because of the reasons listed here. We continue to experience strong economic and revenue growth. We have a strong balance sheet. We maintain manageable debt and long-term liabilities. And very importantly, we demonstrate strong financial management practices and policies. This is my last slide, and in conclusion, I must say that the city's financial strength is not something that was achieved overnight, but through years of consistent and outstanding financial and budget management and stewardship by the council, city staff, and the city treasurers before me. So I thank you, and I can answer any questions that you may have.
Very good. I will note, first of all, that I don't see any requests for public comment, and therefore I will close public comment on this issue. Move on to council comment or a motion. Councilwoman Janik.
Thank you, Sonia. Really, really nice report. So appreciate all that information. And I appreciate the fact that it was in an understandable fashion. We didn't have 1,000 pages of so many numbers. So thank you. I do have one question, and it's on the slide where you talked about maintain policy reserves. And that looks wonderful. And I just want to make sure that it's in the industry averages. General fund stabilization reserves is 10% like the industry average for that reserve.
Mayor, members of the council, that is a very good question. That is actually a little lower than best practice, and there is no law that dictates what level of reserve that is required, but there are best practices. We are actually in the process of looking at all our financial policies. We will be bringing financial policies to council to recommend actually moving some of those reserves to a higher level to be comparable to our peer cities and best practices. So we will bring that to council in February, I believe.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it.
Councilmember Durham. And
since I'm on the audit committee, I did read almost all of the financial report, and it is easy to understand why we've gotten awards for it, because it's very readable, it's very easy to understand, which financial reports aren't always. And so I wanted to commend the people who put together. It is a very good job. It's something that's worthwhile for certainly all of us and for other citizens to read as well. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Caputi.
Thank you, Sonia. I just want to point out that a lot of us up here spend our days reading a lot of negative comments and complaints, and it's so great to spend part of our council meeting reminding each other that the city's actually doing an exceptionally good job, that we're heading in a great direction, and as you pointed out, for years we've been doing the right thing and and moving in this positive way. And so, yay for us. It's just really nice to have a positive report, and I don't think we can underscore it enough. So great job. Thank you.
So at this point, we're just accepting the financial report, will not require any vote per se. Are there any other comments? Seeing none, we will move on. Thank you very much again, Treasurer Sonia Andrews. We have a second opportunity for public comment at the end of our regular meeting. I see that there is no public comment requested, so therefore I would close the second public comment opportunity. Finally, if there were any petition, it would have been submitted by now, so acknowledge that there is no petition presented, and therefore we move on with that item. The final item in our regular agenda is whether or not there is any mayor or council item tonight. I was not informed of any item in particular. So we will be looking at the next part of our meeting, which will be a work study, and a subject is posted. So I will adjourn the meeting and then we will reconvene in 10 minutes. Hope at 6:30 and continue with the informal work study. Thank you. We're adjourned. I call the December 8th, 2021 City Council Work-Study Session to order. For the record, I note that all members of the City Council and charter officers are present. Work-study sessions provide a less formal setting for the mayor and council to discuss specific topics with each other and with city staff, and provide an opportunity to give and receive some direction from the council. To provide an opportunity for the public input during a work study, we do allow for up to 5 speakers as public or comment. And I have confirmation there are no in-person or remote requests from the public. So accordingly, I will close the public comment on the work study item. The subject that we have as posted is the amendment consideration to board and commission member ordinances and related council rules of procedure. The presenter is Brent Stockwell, Assistant City Manager, and then the second topic is the Code of Ethics. The presenter is City Attorney Sherry Scott. So we'll lead off with you, Brent. Thanks.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. I'm happy to be here talking to you about a subject other than short-term rentals. Board and commission members are a really important part of the city's community involvement process. And just for context, I've actually been working with the council on board and commission related matters all the way back to 2004. So, you know, I guess they say if you don't get it right the first time, try again. So I appreciate the opportunity to keep working on this to address what the current council would like, because we certainly have worked in the past to address these prior ordinance changes to what prior councils have wanted. And also for context too, of the 21 boards and commissions that you have and the 133 members, 15 of those, so 94 of your appointees are actually in areas that I support. So I have a really vested interest in making sure we get this right, because those appointees of yours are those that are out there weighing in on matters that are of importance to the staff that I support, and I really want to make sure and get that right. And so what I wanted to do in this is to give a little bit of background on this and also give you some factual content, and then hopefully facilitate a way to get some direction from you all on what all you want to do at this point. So the current, let's look at, talk about background first. So the current board and commission attendance procedures that we have, they went into effect back on September 13th, 2011, when ordinance number 3963 was adopted. At that time, this new section set up standard attendance requirements for all members, rather than having attendance requirements vary by each one of those 21 different public bodies. Under the ordinance that's in place today, the chair is required to notify the mayor if certain conditions are met. That helps make sure that there's consistency in application of the ordinance requirements, and also keeps the chair out of the difficult position of having to try and figure out when someone should continue to serve and when they should not. And that was really the practice that we had in place prior to that time. What that did, and so just thinking back to the time of 2011, that kept discretion on the part of the mayor and council, because there may still be compelling reasons why the mayor and city council may still want to have someone serve, even though they've missed 3 consecutive meetings or 4 out of 6, such as due to a serious medical issue or that of a family member. So that's just the context on the rules that we have in place. And so thinking back a little bit less than a month from today, you did have a proposal on November 9th. And there were 2 items that were prepared and discussed and continued to this meeting. They clarified how the council will consider the removal of a member and whom the chair should notify. So they amended the council rules of procedure to say how you would handle that, and then also stated that the chair should notify the full city council rather than just the mayor or designee. So that another option that you could consider is to continue the current practice, and that is that the mayor or any member of the council could request the removal or replacement of any member during the mayor and council items And if an item receives the majority vote of the council, it would be added to the next available regular council meeting agenda unless another date is established by the council. That's your current rules of procedure. Alternatively, 4 or more members of the council could request to have the removal or replacement of a member added to a scheduled council meeting agenda, also another section of your rules of procedure. Another thing that you may want to consider is rolling back all the way prior to 2011 and just saying, hey, let's strike these requirements altogether. Well, what would happen if you did that? Well, then the full council would retain the ability under Scottsdale Revised Code 2-241E, which says that a member of the board or commission may be removed by the council at any time with or without cause. And you could do that with a change to rules of procedure or not. So before I get into some other options to think and walking through the direction, you know, as we were thinking about this, and I worked on this with your city manager, city clerk, and city attorney, so I was just the one that was designated to do the presentation tonight. But really, there's 2 areas of key direction. One is the expectations for board and commission members, and the second is how do we handle board or members of our public bodies when they fall short of those expectations. So in the area of the expectations, we have considered absences, tardies, and recusal. So as a reminder, our current policy considers a tardy member to be absent and sets the standard for review at 3 consecutive absences or 4 meetings in a 6-month period. So what we did is we looked at the data for the last 6 months. And so Shane Stone, who was up here earlier looking at legislative agenda item or presenting that to you, he also went and reviewed all of the agendas and minutes of the last 6 months. And here's what we found. So there were 128 board and commission members that met over the last 6 months. And the current policy in place today should have resulted in the review of 1 board member, and it did. Absences and tardies are extremely, remarkably rare. Only 11 out of 128 members were tardy or absent more than once over the last 6 months. As rare as absences are, recusals are even more rare. There have been 8 total recusals over the last 6 months, which includes 5 board members and commissioners with only 1 having multiple recusals. And that 1 commissioner recused themselves on more than 20% of their action item votes within the last 6 months. And it was really due to the fact that their commission only had 3 action item votes. So they recused themselves 1 time. That's 33% of the time. So I just want to mention that. That's one of the, you know, as they say, the devil's in the details of, you know, any of these kind of uniform rules. And we just wanted to make sure that you're aware of those and thinking of those as you move forward on this. So 2 other options I wanted to mention, then I'll get to a slide that can really kind of walk us through how you can provide direction to us on this so that we can come back with an ordinance or a resolution change that's acceptable to the majority of the council. So another option that we wanted to bring forward for your consideration would be, instead of this discretionary removals that became place in 2011, another thing you could do is make the removal of a member for absences non-discretionary. That would make a removal automatic if a standard is met. So a few other standards in the ordinance are automatic. So if you lose your residency within the city, or if you're convicted of a felony of a crime of moral turpitude. And what that means is that instead of having to schedule an item to remove the member, we just go straight to the process of scheduling their vacancy and filling that along with all the other board and commission vacancies. So a process that is familiar to you because you just did it last night. And that would mean we wouldn't have to formally schedule the removal of member. So if one of the things that you're concerned about is, I don't know, to add insult to injury, for lack of a better phrase, and bringing someone forward once they have missed the attendances or recused too many times, or whatever the standard is, then you could make this automatic. And then you could consider, do we want to reappoint that person or not? Do we want to make them eligible for reappointment or not? This will all be much more clear on the next slide, but one more thing. So recusals, the council could also provide direction to consider the removal of a member once they reach a certain threshold of recusals due to conflict of interest. This is also not a new matter for us before the council. We talked to you about this back in May. We talked to the prior council about it the year before. We keep running into challenges with trying to figure out a solution that really works and always catches within it whom you would want to catch, and always releases everybody you would want to release and continue. That's the tricky part. But we do have 4 options for you. One would be to equate recusals to absences. So a certain number of recusals, such as 3, would equal 1 absence. And let me just be clear too here, because I'm watching people make notes. I am basically reading from the memo we got to you yesterday, so all of this should be out on the website and available to everyone too, so it should be in your Dropbox packet. The second one is this, and that is setting a percentage of total items. So set a threshold such as 20% as the limit for recusals based on the total number of action items voted on by the body. And I just mentioned that can have some challenges with it if you have a relatively low number of action items. Works much better when you have a lot. Then another one would be setting as a percentage of total meetings. So set a threshold such as 20% as the limit for recusals based on the total number of meetings where a member recuses themselves from any action item due to a conflict. And then the fourth option that we came up with was to continue with the current practice. When the extent of recusals by any individual member becomes problematic to most council members, the council has the ability to schedule the removal under Scottsdale Revised Code 2-241E. That's the serving at the pleasure of council. So hopefully that was not too long. And what I've done here is fleshed out a number of things that we think you might want to provide direction on. And let me go through them first, and then we can maybe go through them in order, or do something else. I'm just here to help you. So the first one, absences, is the standard needed, yes or no? If yes, what should it be? The current standard is 3 consecutive meetings or 4 meetings in a 6-month period. And I'm saying that and just making sure I have that right, because I know in one version of this PowerPoint we didn't have it right. It's 3 consecutive or 4 in a 6-month period. Yes, that's correct. The second one is this, tardies, is the standard needed? Yes or no? If yes, what should it be? The current standard is that any tardy counts the same as an absence. But if a tardy counts the same as an absence and someone is only 1 minute, 5 minutes, 15 minutes late, but they're still there to vote on any of the action items, is that as problematic as someone that's there, missing an entire meeting? Always thinking about all of these things, what's the unintended consequence from any of these actions? Next one, recusals, is the standard needed, yes or no? If yes, what should it be? There's not currently a standard. Notification, who's notified? The mayor and designee are currently required to be notified by the chair when standards are met. Should the full council be notified? That's basically the proposal that was before you on November 9th. Then removal is a separate kind of category. When the standard is met, is it automatic removal, or is it scheduled for consideration by the city council or something else? And then last but not least, the item that I mentioned earlier, if someone has been removed because of absences or tardies or recusals, can they reapply immediately, or would there be a 1-year waiting period, such as for the member who has already served 2 terms? I have tried to simplify this to make this as easy as possible. Rest assured, it is not this simple. So there's a lot of details on here, particularly on any of these items. But what we want to do is we want to get a sense of what your direction is as a whole, so to finish the conversation that was started previously by multiple councils, and then get some direction, and then we'll come back, write this up into an ordinance or resolution as needed, and work through all those issues so that we can clarify for you at the time any unintended consequences that we notice as a result of it. Thank you.
Thank you, and hopefully we can take them, all 6 items, piece by piece, and get some consensus direction. I see Councilmember Milhaven and Councilmember Durham.
Thank you. Brandon, nice segue. It can get pretty complicated, and I agree with the mayor. Maybe we take one at a time. But I also have another suggestion for process before we get into the meat of it. I know in a work study we can't take a vote that takes any legal action. But when I first sat on council, staff advised me, they said, when you're in a work study and the conversation ebbs and flows and everybody says what they think and you agree and you disagree, at the end of the conversation, sometimes staff are not quite as clear as they'd like to be on what we would like. And so perhaps to help make this move along a little more efficiently, maybe we can make a motion to direct staff so we can see who agrees or doesn't agree with one particular idea. So that otherwise, I think each of us would have to speak on each point. And certainly if my colleagues want to speak, they can go ahead. But if you agree with the motion that was made in that direction, then we could move this on a little more quickly. So I'd like to make that suggestion for process.
That makes sense to me.
Good, thank you. Okay, in that case, I'll get started. Since I have the floor. So in terms of absences, Brent, when you said, if something becomes problematic, for me, that sort of takes a really broad swath that I think makes a lot of sense on a lot of these points. So if an absence becomes problematic, a staff member, the staff liaison to the board or commission, or the chair could notify, we can decide who, that this has become an issue, and then that could get referred to council, and then 4 council members could say, yes, we agree to hear this in a meeting to consider this person's continued attendance. So I, for one, I don't think we need an absence standard, and would just go back to your if it becomes problematic. That would be my point of view.
Councilmember Durham, Councilwoman Janik.
I have a question first, which is, how far in advance are board and commission calendars set? Because with Mr. Lane, we have a calendar that's practically a full year in advance. And so it's very easy for us to say, I know I'm going to be out of the country then, please adjust the meeting. And it's usually very, very easy to take care of issues like that. I'm not sure if it's so easy to do that on boards or commissions.
Yep, mayors and members of the council, Councilmember Durham, in the vast majority, they are set because they are the same time of the month and the same day of the week every year and have been for some time. So you can plan ahead.
Okay. My suggestion for the policy is I think it gets very difficult for all 4 of us to try to debate why a person missed or why they didn't miss or what the reason was, or et cetera, et cetera. And I think it just doesn't make a lot of sense in my view. So after thinking about this, I think we should stick with the standard that we have 3 consecutive or 4 and 6. But I would also require that a notice be made before that last absence. And I would put that in the ordinance just to make sure it's official, so that a person would be on notice, and then they can try to come into compliance. But if they're not able to, I would offer the possibility of reappointment. I think it's very difficult for the 4 of us to try to debate over why somebody missed a meeting and throws us into sort of controversy over whether that was a good reason or not, and it's just something I don't think it's appropriate for us to take on.
Councilwoman Janik and Councilwoman Littlefield.
Thank you, Mayor. I, for the most part, agree with what our councilman had said, that I prefer to have a standard. It makes it less political, or the perception of it being political would be reduced if we have the standard. Now, there's one thought I did have. I understand 3 consecutive meetings, that's pretty serious absence. But when you say 4 and 6 months, you've got some committees that meet twice a month and some that meet once a month. And if you meet once a month and you miss 4 or 4 and 6 months, as opposed to missing 4 out of double that number, I think we need to give a little more leeway on that 4 and 6 months to the committees that meet twice a month. Does that make sense? Just look at the numbers and make it relatively the same for both. So if I miss 4 in 6 months, but we only meet once a month, that's 4 out of 6, okay? But if it's 4 out of meeting twice a month, that's 4 of 12, and that's only missing 1/3 of the meetings. And perhaps we should be a little bit more lenient and give them a few more meetings. Now, maybe it's not doable because of consistency, and I think Jim Thompson has a comment on that.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, Councilmember Janik, If you're going to go down that path, you should probably look to a percentage. So if you're talking 4 times in 6 months and you have 2 a month, that's 12. 4, 12 is 33%. Likewise, on the other side, if it was, 4 times 3, your percentage is far greater. So maybe it's a 30 or 35% or 40% or 33 if 33.3333 whatever forever infinity, but that would be your percentage basis if you really want to look at it from that way. And I think that's easier to handle than saying if you meet once a month or if you meet twice and all of a sudden the board has to meet twice rather than once. So to accomplish that, maybe it's a percentage that you look at. Thank you.
Yes, thanks for the clarity on that. And I'm curious what the other council members think about this.
Okay, Councilwoman Littlefield.
Yeah, I liked what Ben said. I think that made a lot of sense. If we want to break that down into percentages, that's fine too. I don't mind. It should be consistent. I think a warning call would be something that's just basic common courtesy. I would like to do that. These people are volunteers. They have lives. They have families. They have other things going on besides, attending our boards and commission meetings. So, they might not be keeping track of stuff like this. And just a warning call saying, hey, you missed 3, make sure you go to the next one. I think that's a good set. One thing that they said, tardies, are they a standard now? Do they equate to an absence? And I think that should not be, because there's a lot of reasons why you could be absent. You could be in an automobile accident. You could be a witness to an automobile accident and have to stay there because the police says, you, over here, I want to talk to you. It could be just a number of different things. A business meeting that runs late, traffic in general, which is getting worse, by the way. So I think that a tardy should not necessarily be equated to an absence, because it could be just a minute or 2 or 5. Or if you show up in the last 5 minutes, there may be a line that needs to be drawn there so that it doesn't become ridiculous. But in general, I don't think a tardy of 5 minutes late because of traffic, that's not something that I would say equates to an absence.
Okay, well, here's a few comments. And did you need to respond to Councilman?
Well, Mayor, if I could,
Yes,
Mayor and
please.
members of the council, as you were talking about that, because I'm working directly with chairs a lot and the staff representatives of boards and commission, I just wanted to say how we do typically handle it. That I can think of one in particular where a member had missed 2 meetings, and the chair knows their responsibility is they've got to call the mayor's office if they hit 3, and so they call and ask for help. And I said, well, why don't you just reach out to them directly and let them know about that and see whatever you can do to get them to be at that meeting. I will also say it's never been easier to attend a board or commission meeting in Scottsdale, particularly during the pandemic, because we've invested a lot in Zoom technology and remote meetings, and so people that even are on business trips are still able, many of them are still able to participate fully in the meeting remotely. And we've always offered telephonic technology as well. I just wanted to add that, context, because we certainly try and work with it. And we haven't really talked about the issue of trying to make sure there's a quorum in place, but the staff representative and chair are always following up and trying to make sure they know exactly who's going to attend a meeting, because if we don't have the quorum present, we can't hold the meeting at all. And it's an embarrassment to the city and an inconvenience to the public and anyone that might come if a board has a posted meeting they can't attend for a quorum. So I just wanted to mention that because of some of the comments that were made, so you have a little bit of context on how we as staff handle those and how we support it. Thank you.
Well, first of all, when we can, look for common ground in this discussion. And the first role, as you mentioned, of the boards, commissions, and task forces is to fulfill and help the city process. So I think we can all agree with that. The second situation has to do with vacancies. When there's an empty chair, does that serve the public? Point number 1. So it is a concern as far as absences, recusals, if that's the reason or not, or of course, tardiness if someone arrives 30 or 40 minutes late. So the subject, first of all, that I would look for agreement among my peers is in 2011, the rule for 3 misses in a row and 4 out of 6 was established, so that's 10 years. 10 years it's been there. Councilman Milhaven voted for that, and it's been the standard that is used in onboarding all the commissioners, task force members, and so forth. So those rules are pretty clear, and I think you mentioned there may have been one instance or so of somebody that, maybe a couple instances that you know of, where that standard, which has been in practice since 2011, is established. So I believe that standard is a good one. It's not a reckless, we can't go with no standards whatsoever, in my opinion. So the next question about having onboarding, when onboarding happens, all commissioners have to go through the rules and discussion of that, and also on the ethics training, which is mandatory for all boards and commissions, as with city council. So I think we can agree that that standard works. It seems to align with, and it has worked for a substantial period of time, and I don't see any reason why we would loosen that. I think it's a positive expectation. The question about tardies, I think if there was a tardy beyond 30 minutes, I only saw one, by the way, of a tardy mentioned. It was 35 minutes late or whatever, and that's what the clerk records. It was just shown on the minutes of the meeting. As far as the notification, so we've got absences. We have, I believe that the standard is pretty clear. And if somebody is disrupted and, you know, in their personal life, business life, vacations or otherwise, that's fine. The first position is family. The first position, they did the right thing, right? Either business or family or personal it may be paramount. And I'm in favor of holding the line on that, allowing automatic, because that practice has been consistent, and then the openness to reappoint once somebody gets their, I don't want to say life together, but the priorities are always, right? Family, business, and then, you know, pleasure or whatever may happen in those orders. And you would hope, wouldn't want a commission to come ahead of family, right? So this method of then reviewing every 10 years what those standards are is a good one. The fact is that it did come to my desk according to the rules established by Councilmember Milhaven and the council at the time. I didn't ask for that to happen. It came to me because any individual or any future mayor, the person exceeded the threshold that all the other boards and commission members are held to. There have been cases I saw where, you know, someone had missed 4 meetings by the time they quit returning calls or whatever was happening. So there's no question that we have a sound threshold we can all agree on when we take that, or when a person takes that position. If for some reason they got a job out of town and other demands happen, certainly those become an attendance or a meeting miss question. Now, the other question has to do, so I have no problem with having an automatic situation where if you miss those, then the question is not the person. The question is the vacancy, right? The question is whether or not there's 2 or 3 seats up here that are empty. And I know we encountered that recently on DR when there were only 4 here. So it's not a personal thing. It's just a basic, go back to point 1, which is our expectations are there, and they are being met generally by 99 or 95%, and it's a good threshold. I would not lower the bar by saying, well, you can miss 5 in a row. That won't serve us better. There are several other comments. I have one about recusals and so forth. Let's go to Vice Mayor Caputi and then Councilwoman Whitehead.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, Brent. I think I'm going to reiterate, these are volunteers, and we're grateful for all of their work. You mentioned how rare this actually happens, and I think that part of me feels like this is a solution looking for a problem, right? I mean, this barely ever comes up. So my opinion is that we are making this way too complicated. We're going to go down a million rabbit holes up here about, I could not follow what Councilwoman Janik was saying at all. And I think if we all took our turn about saying, this many absences, this many tardies, this many recusals, it's going to get absurd. And again, these are volunteers, and most of them really want to be here. I mean, we watch the process pretty regularly, how earnest and intent people are to get a position on our boards and commissions. They're really happy to be here. So possibly we're overthinking this. I would suggest that we don't need any of these rules, that the board and commission members always serve at the pleasure of this council, and that we have an annual review for everybody every year. So it would be very easy at that point to say, I mean, we always get the audit report, and we can say, boy, this person missed a couple of meetings, they were late, whatever it might have been, and we can make a decision based on the rule of all of us being alerted and then coming up with the decision to put it on an agenda and possibly get rid of somebody if they were causing a problem. Probably with some sort of a call, as you suggested, to reaching out to someone and seeing what the heck's the problem. But the point is, we're all going to become babysitters, right? I mean, it really isn't happening that much. So why not just get rid of the rule and review at the end of the year when needed? I mean, maybe if you want to repeat how few of times this has actually happened, right? We would just adjust it, address it at the end of the year and move on. The idea of an auto removal, I don't feel strongly about a lot of the other rules, but that would really bother me. Again, these are volunteers, and I think that's totally disrespectful to just automatically kick someone off without some sort of a, hey, did you realize that there's an issue here? What's the problem? I think that's just common courtesy. But yeah, I mean, again, I think we're overthinking this, and I'm happy to hear what the rest of the council wants to do, but my opinion is this doesn't really need to be this complicated.
Okay, Councilwoman Whitehead, Councilwoman Janik.
Thank you, Mayor. So I think that the rules that we have in place work. And I think that's great. And I think the low absences that we have just may be because of the rules. And I think there's nothing we want less than to have arbitrary decisions. So I do absolutely support having rules. These commissions, I have served on a commission, and obviously I chair the DR periodically. They're so crucial. And so having the full commissions or boards in attendance is crucial. So I do support pretty much what Councilman Tom Durham said, and I think it was echoed by Councilwomen Littlefield and Janik. I think that I support the 3 consecutive absences. That's some things could be wrong there, and we should always be checking on our commissioners when there's such absences. I support adding specific language that I would like to add that the chair and or staff person in charge of that commission contact the commissioner after each absence, number 1, to make sure that they're okay, and number 2, to remind them of the rule. I like the idea of using a percentage. Again, this is public dollars, not just serving on these commissions. So we do want these seats filled. So We'll let staff advise us on a good percentage so we're not being consistent no matter how many meetings a month these boards or commissions have. I'd like to hear more from my colleagues on, I don't like the, I want to add one more thing. If a commissioner or board member does reach that 3 or even the 2, I would like the whole council notified. However, I do think it should be a decision of one. And whether it's automatic has some benefits, but I will be interested to hear how the commission, how the rest of the council feels on that one. I'm not real strong one way or another. There are benefits to the commissioner either direction. And on tardies, I think that should be at the discretion of the chair of the commission and or staff in conjunction with staff. So I think that's where I'm at. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Janik, then Councilmember Millhaven.
Thank you, Mayor. I also agree that we need to be checking on the people that are missing the meetings more regularly. If there's a reason, hopefully we can resolve it before it's an issue. And I also think the reason we have good attendance is because we do have rules, and that's exactly what Councilwoman Whitehead said. The other thing that I think we also need to consider, it's always good to talk to both sides. How do most of the people, those people that are serving, how do they feel about the rules? Have you gotten many complaints? Are they pretty happy with them? Do they think they're reasonable? Are there any that they really object to? So it'd be nice to get some input from them too, because they are dedicated citizens.
And Mayor, members of the council, Councilwoman Janik, if there's a question there, but when we did this back in 2018, not only did we go out and talk to all the board and commission members, we actually held a session over at the Community Design Studio back when you could meet with people in person and have meetings like that, right? And we asked them, how was the process going for them and what improvements could we make? And we did include that into a report at the time. I don't recall at the time, I haven't reviewed it within the last couple of days, but I don't recall if attendances or recusals were an issue that was mentioned by them. The issue that I hear the most from board and commission members is they want to make sure that they're asked their opinion on meaningful topics and that those meaningful topics are shared with the council, and the council takes that into consideration in the decisions that are made. The focus is always about the content rather than about the procedure. But we also we have to check before the meeting to make sure there's, at least 4 members there, because that's a quorum for all of those bodies. And then we do, check afterwards. So it is something that's in place. I think the fact that people want to serve and that this is happening is a sign why it's relatively rare. And again, we've also gone through a very difficult period of time with the pandemic. So this has impacted so many people's lives and is a difficult time. I think hopefully when we can get to a more normal period, we'll have a better sense of what that practice would be usually. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Millhaven, Councilmember Durham.
I think now that all my colleagues have had a chance to speak, I think I'm going to try to make a couple of directions to staff for us to vote on, and I'm going to try to break this into some small pieces to see if this will move things along. So although I disagree with the majority of my colleagues, what I heard most of them say was that we needed an absence standard, and there seemed to be some agreement that the current standard of 3 consecutive or 4 and 6 months was agreeable to most, so I would make a motion to direct staff to retain the current absence policy. We can add other stuff to it.
One way is to, you're asking for a vote, but actually we're just going to give a nod, or it appears as though that direction, having rules, makes sense. We don't take official.
I thought we had agreed that we would do that.
Well,
to do
we
a
are
motion
going to
to
take a
direct staff.
nod, and unless you.
All right, everybody nod if you agree.
That's all I'm saying. Yeah, if there was an objection, the discussion would go the other way. So, okay.
Solange wants to
now,
comment.
do you want to go back and forth so somebody else can have a viewpoint, or would you like to lead on all of them?
I want to give all of my colleagues an opportunity to say what they want to say, but I certainly hope we could get out of here before midnight.
Well, I agree, and I saw Councilman Durham a millisecond right behind you.
Because if we can pick little pieces out that we can agree on, and then we can move to the next, like I know Betty suggested percentages. So if you wanted to add percentages on top of this, we could then make that the next discussion item and just take it one little piece at a time.
I also said common ground, and this is the way we're going. If you'd like to take two, and then somebody else could take
Fine,
two.
I'm done.
Let's do that. Okay. Councilmember Durham, do you have a consensus seeker?
Thank you, Mayor. I think the 3 consecutive makes perfect sense, but 4 out of 6 for a commission that only meets once a month is a pretty low standard. That would mean that they would miss the majority of half of a year. So I'd like to think about a way to try to fix that with a percentage standard that would require certainly more than than 4 out of the 6.
And in that case, point well taken, and we would look at staff or city manager to kind of bring back some options on that based on that discussion. Jim, did you have some point to make there?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of council, and I think we all spoke to item A, and I think right now, some may not have agreed, but the consensus up there appears to be that the 3 and consecutive or percentage, and if we were trying to do the same as the 4 and 6 months, we would come back with the 30%, but we'll look at how many meet twice a month, once a month, and make sure that percentage is correct. So that's a minor change to what we have today. I think I also heard that staff contact the member after 1 and just make sure everything's okay, things are going all right, and then of course after 2 again, probably, we'll go through that every time there's an absence. But I think then this council's desire is to contact all of you when they reach that 3 consecutive or the percentage, 30%, and the 6 months, whatever that number so needs to be that we'll bring back to you, that we notify all of you of that, and then determination of how to proceed at that point in time. And I think that kind of came out in different points, but if I was, trying to do math in my head, I think we got there. That's pretty consistent. Come back. Tardies is one that I'm just going to walk through a couple of them because you did many touched on some of those to help it. But on Tardies, there's a little bit mixed there. Is that up to the board chair? Kind of heard that. I heard that, time-wise, it's 30 minutes or sometime. We don't have one now, and a lot of things do come up in Tardies. Are they consistent Tardies? Are these Tardies that go over a period of time? You may not want to touch that. I think if somebody's going to miss most of the meeting, you assume to be absent. I think it's just something that they probably won't come if they're missing most of the meeting unless we know about it, and it's probably one time for a special incident that happened, not continuous. Recusals, I know that that's one that we struggle with, but one of the challenges, and we didn't bring this out, but I'll be frank about it, is that on recusal, some of our boards and commissions require some level of expertise. And if you're an expert on those areas, you sometimes have that conflict because you may do work in the community for which you live. Many do. We hope that. In fact, many things we talk about is work and play and live and all those things in one place. You would hope that transpires. And so some have that. But it hasn't really been an issue with exception of maybe 1 or 2 during period of time that I've been here, which is now almost 5 years. So very few do we see those recusals, even with that expertise that's required. And we have a few boards that we do desire to have that expertise on. In fact, in some cases, the tourism environment, we actually require hoteliers to be active GMs, and so many things could impact them. The other thing we run into with recusals, which I want to be careful of, 2 things that occur. One, there is the conflict of interest, which you have to declare, which is defined by state law and which we define as well. Then there's the, when you think about it, sometimes we just recuse ourselves because there may be appearance, which is not by law, and then do we have to have an interpretation every time? Sometimes we just recuse because there may be an appearance that we have a conflict, even though we don't. And we recommend you dismiss yourself, but we don't say you have to dismiss yourself. So some do just because of an appearance issue, even though they don't have a direct benefit from that case. And so now we're starting to measure that. And then what you're going to do is force people, unless they have a direct impact that they won't, and then you're still going to get the people questioning it. So again, you may not wish to touch that one at this point. And so we can go through the others, D, E, and F, but I think we always come back to the thing that we have a rule, maybe just fine tune it a little bit with notification. I think that's been an issue that we may not, from a staff perspective. I'll take that and do a great job after somebody misses one to contact them. I think then after the second, and then I think the percentage for those boards and commissions that have 1 meeting, 2 meetings, 3 meetings, 4 meetings a month or over a period of time, we could adjust that. Reappointment, you always have the chance to reappoint unless they termed out. So you still have that ability, and I don't think we should make a decision on that whether or not, because there may be circumstances there, so just leave it the way it is. Removal, same thing. You have the ability right now to bring anybody back to remove for whatever reason you desire. You make the appointment and you can remove them from that appointment. So again, and then notification, again, I think we addressed that by notifying all of council prior to that third one coming forth. So hopefully that helped, and I'm just trying to help us all kind of come to a conclusion here. So it sounds like just some minor modifications to A, and we could bring those back. If you want to address any others, we're happy to come back with those as well. But I think it gets more complex and then more challenging, and challenging on a staff side too. The more rules you have, the more we have to monitor and then execute as well.
Thank you, City Manager. I would add to that, we are a multi-billion-dollar organization, and to have to re-audit or revisit everyone annually because there were no rules does not work in our favor. Appointing, I want to reiterate this, that the obligation to make the meetings as best possible is very clear. I think that's attributable to our high attendance, but also we have an obligation to the public. The public will come to a meeting, and I know one subject was canceled recently because they barely had a quorum and one person had to leave. So we have the public coming in. They won't know until the final minute, practically, whether they turned away from their jobs or however they came to speak publicly. So holding to that rule is very good. And the other point that we have is that this is why I believe we should we are not offing them from a commission. We are recognizing a vacant position, a vacancy, because the vacancy is a threshold and it's noticeable, right? And it may be, in some cases, we barely have 4 out of 7. So it is a pretty stringent, yet I think a fairly loose requirement that has been satisfied. To move forward with this, also just I know the conflict of interest issues will come up later in the ethics discussion. I will mention the recusal question came shortly after I took office, and we had a simple audit report sent to us by the auditor on recusals, absences, and so forth, and it caught my eye, as mayor, saying, wow, I'm the new mayor, and we had an individual with, substantial amount of recusals, and that did catch my eye because there wasn't a particular rule in place on that. I'm not trying to complicate it right now on recusals. I think a 10-year review is pretty good, and we'll be able to, number one, go back to one, is serve the public. And we're served when we have a full panel, and we are also served as we appoint a member who may have taken a break, who may have had other obligations. It's not disrespectful. It's actually, they are free to have more business or have more, take care of their health obligations, whatever. It's not in any way disrespectful. It's just an acknowledgement that we have a vacant seat to fill. That's my job. That's our job. And we will, I think, hopefully give you enough direction at this point. And let's move on to the next question for that's on the agenda. Thank you. At this point, we have on work study presentation by City Attorney Sherry Scott regarding revisiting the Code of Ethics and some streamline suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor, members of the council, what I intend to do is go over the ethics code, not in detail, but just generally with you tonight. And as we go through each major section, I'll pause and ask for questions and whether or not the council is interested in updating or changing any of those sections. First, let me start just giving you a little history. The Ethics Code was created by a citizens task force in 2005, and it was adopted and implemented in July of 2006. We weren't really sure how many ethics complaints we were going to get or what our experience was going to be after this ethics code went into place. We have some experience with it now, and it has not been amended since it was originally adopted. It's broken into several sections. I'm not going to go into each one of these in detail, but to give you a general overview, we've got definitions, the ethics policy, conflicts of interest, gifts, open government, open meeting laws and executive sessions, preservation and availability of public records, undue influence on subordinates, and enforcement. The only definition, there are very few definitions. There are only 3 as I recall. The only one that's really telling or meaningful is the definition of city officials, because this ethics code applies only to city officials, and city officials are defined as being the mayor, council members, and appointed board and commission members or task force members. It does not include city employees or charter officers. Those are governed by a different ethics code. We do have an ethics code, it's just slightly different than yours. Under the conflicts of interest section in your ethics code, the most important thing for you to know, and I've quoted it here under A, is Arizona law prevents local governments from imposing different conflicts of interest laws than state law. So this is one of those areas that the state has preempted the cities. The ethics code does acknowledge that. This is a quote from the ethics code in A, but it goes on to provide guidance to the mayor and council and appointed board and commission members about what the state conflict of interest rules provide as they interpreted those. The biggest thing for the council to understand is that the state provides that a conflict of interest arises when a city official has a substantial interest, and that's a defined term, in a matter coming through the city's decision-making process. Substantial interest is basically a direct or indirect financial or proprietary interest in a matter coming before the city for a decision by you or your relative. I can't forget that part. And relative is defined fairly broadly. There are exceptions. Every good rule has a few good exceptions, and conflicts of interest is no different. The state law provides exceptions that are considered remote interests, and they have to fall into a specific category of a remote interest set out in state statute. The most common ones that we see are if you're a member of a class of 10. I don't believe we have a council member who's a hotelier, but let's say we did. and their hotel was no bigger than 10 other hotels in Scottsdale, they would be able to vote on things that might financially impact hotels because they would be a member of class of 10 with no greater interest than the others. Another one we see often is a non-salaried officer or member of a nonprofit. That's an exception, a remote interest. A member of a nonprofit cooperative marketing association, again, a remote interest and exception, and receiving municipal services on the same terms as non-officials. For instance, you vote on the water bill rates, you vote on other fees that you may end up paying as citizens of Scottsdale. Those are not conflicts of interest. When a conflict of interest arises, the city official must refrain from participating in any manner in the city's decision-making process as a city official. They have 3 business days to declare the specific nature of their interest on the public record by updating his or her personal interest disclosure form, and I'll go over that with you in a minute, and putting that on file with the clerk's office. You must publicly announce the conflict at the meeting when it's on the agenda and get up and leave the room before the discussion on that item begins. So because state law doesn't allow us to add to the conflicts of interest rules, we do have an aspirational requirement in the ethics code. It's not mandatory, it's just strongly encouraged. And that is that it's strongly encouraged that city officials avoid involvement in situations where there is no technical conflict of interest, but where active participation might raise the perception of undue influence or impropriety. The final section in the conflict of interest section of your ethics code provides that city officials are required to complete a personal interest disclosure form annually before the first meeting in January, but no later than January 31st if you don't have a meeting in January. And I hope you can see it. I've presented a copy of the personal interest disclosure form. You also have it in your packet. It's basically asking the public officials whether or not there's an item coming up on a future agenda that they already know they have a conflict with. And if so, to put that down and to describe the nature of the conflict and get that on file with the city clerk's office. If there are none, then the answer will just be none, and it will be signed and put on file with the city clerk. What happens next if there are conflicts of interest throughout the year? We ask that the board official fill out the declaration of conflict of interest form, and that later gets attached to the personal interest disclosure form. So at the end of the year, we have one document which provides all of the conflicts that that public official has had throughout the annual year. This form does ask for information both on conflicts and recusals to avoid an appearance of impropriety. It's a single form. You check either you declare that there's a substantial interest or you don't believe you have one, but it's still an appearance of impropriety if you were to act. The public officials are to explain what the nature of the conflict is. They sign, date it, and again, it's supposed to be on file with the city clerk within 3 days. And that's 3 days of the time the item comes before the body. So that's conflicts of interest in a nutshell. And I'm pausing here to ask if you have any changes or additions that you would like to see to this section. Some thoughts that I had is whether you wanted to add any additional aspirational requests or remove aspirational requests, whether you are interested in seeing some simplification to the forms. I do believe we could make some minor changes to the forms that might simplify them somewhat, or any other clarifications you may want to see to this section.
Attorney Scott, just for clarification, on the conflicts of interest and voting upon something, that's usually implied in this jurisdiction. However, if a party had business in another state, another jurisdiction, another city with a principal partner of an LLC as a consultant, or in some way, how would we actually be able to discern, or is it written there in any jurisdiction, or how can that be? It seems to be associated with what comes before the city. However, I don't know if it's descriptive enough to cover all jurisdictions or other financial interests. Just generally wondering that.
So there's a difference between a conflict of interest form and a financial disclosure form. The council will fill out a financial disclosure form, but the unelected appointed officials will not. And they are only filling out a conflict of interest form if they have an actual conflict on an item that's coming before them. If they have an actual conflict on an item coming before them, they absolutely cannot participate on behalf of the city in any way. But if they don't have anything coming before them that presents a conflict, they have no requirement to disclose any other business activities that they may have in other jurisdictions or pending with other bodies.
Okay. Again, just as to form, and of course, these conflict forms relate to us in our financial disclosure and then to board members. It seems to me, in looking at some of the ones that were filed in the clerk's office, they don't seem to be as descriptive. There's a description, but I would recommend that some of them might say site plan or item number. I believe that under description, if it's, it would be more useful to say case number ZN345 or case number whatever, applicant so-and-so or client so-and-so, because then it can be traceable in some way, and it validates the declaration that the person's making. It's good to know, and they want to disclose that. Right. But again, some of what I've come across has been, I don't want to say sloppy, but I think it would be a good, transparent way of explaining it without having to dig through all the records and so forth.
Right.
And so it would be the client of the individual, or it would be just like if I said I had a bank loan on my financials, and then I'd say, well, it's with bank of such and such. Because it's more than just saying I had a bank loan. So that's my suggestion as we review this. It will be helpful to trace that, because then, as you said, you staple that to the yearly financial disclosure, and it would mean more. It would be actually doing a favor to whoever's declaring that, and it certainly would be more traceable for the future.
I understand. I think I misunderstood you before. Yes, we can modify the form to prompt the person filling it out to provide a little bit more information, and staff could probably do a better job of making sure that the information they're supposed to put down gets down on the form, because our board and commission members aren't filling these out all the time, and they probably need a little help and assistance from time to time. So I will work with legal staff advising the boards to make sure they know to have us take a look at those forms when they do come in, so that we can make sure they're properly completed. But I also think this form could be simplified somewhat. Sure. And prompt the board member who's filling this out about what type of information they need to be including.
I'm going to go a little further with this, just again, to serve the public. If someone were to come up to a Parks and Rec meeting and someone may say, I sell fertilizer and I recuse from this decision of whatever, or irrigation systems related to a policy decision. I think if it's a DR case in particular, because I'm very familiar, having worked here brought projects for over 40 years, that a staff report, which goes out to the public, might state that board member so-and-so has declared a conflict, or so that at least the public would know. It's just freedom of information, and it's a good tool. So when the public comes in the door and they say, well, gee, 3 or 4 people, they would not know. So the self-declaration is a good tool for everyone, and transparency helps us assure that we have a quorum, and it's a manageable thing, I believe. Obviously, if some consultant is working with staff, they know that, and it's a good tool for the public to know as well. It's just a suggestion as we discuss these and move forward. I saw Councilwoman Janik.
Just a quick question on page 7. Do you think 3 business days is sufficient amount of time for the declaration, or should we give them a little more time?
Well, it's 3 days from the time that it comes up on the agenda. So I think that that's sufficient, because usually they know weeks in advance that it's coming up on the agenda.
Okay, thank you.
But of course, we encourage them to get it on file as soon as they can.
Vice Mayor Caputi?
I'm not 100% sure what the mayor was talking about. I couldn't quite follow what he wants to have listed, but I just want to reiterate that we probably wouldn't create additional rules over and above what the state requires, correct?
That's correct. You're absolutely correct there. But the state law does require that a board and commission member explain the nature of their conflict of interest.
Certainly.
And I think that's what the mayor was alluding to, that sometimes we get the forms and it's not really clear what the conflict of interest is. We know the matter that they conflicted out on, but we don't know why, because there's not enough information on the form. And I think a lot of that is just lack of clarity in the form and just working with the board members a little bit more. So I believe we can change this to prompt the board members and make it a little easier for them to fill out.
I don't think it's usually that complicated, though. I know I sat on the Development Review Board for 3 years as well, and I know usually when someone conflicts out, it's because, you've got a landscape architect, for instance, that's working on that project that we're being asked to vote on. So I just never realized it was overly more complicated than that. That makes sense, of course. If you're being employed on that project that we're going to be voting on, of course you would recuse yourself. The other quick comment I wanted to make was, I don't know how comfortable I feel with making a lot of aspirational parts to our code of ethics. I think if we're going to make a code of ethics, we don't want to be aspirational. We want there to be much more definite rules and regulations, because as we've seen, there's, and we don't want to leave too much open to interpretation. So my opinion would be keep the aspirational parts of it to a minimum, and let's make very clear what we're looking for in terms of expectations of ethical behavior. Thanks.
So at this point, going piece by piece, I would ask for a nod. I believe that the conflict of interest state law allows 2 things. One is the description, and one is an explanation. And so certainly saying I'm a landscape architect is the explanation, but the description is case number, applicant, and so forth. So that's good, useful information. It gets less aspirational. It's more direct, and it's more complete for the public. Next thing, you had to.
I think I've got it.
Okay, thank you.
Unless anybody else had a comment on conflicts. Moving on to the next section that gets some attention from time to time, prohibited gifts. City officials are prohibited from soliciting, receiving, accepting gifts of any kind from anyone engaged in a general practice, and that's not a defined term currently, or specific situation involving the city's decision-making or permitting process. So gifts of any kind is defined within that code provision itself, and it's really anything of value. But the definition goes on for some time. It's money, services, loans, travel, hospitality, including meals or entertainment, promises of future gifts, anything of value that might be construed as an attempt to create a more favorable relationship than that of the general public, including the purchase, sale, lease, or personal or real property, employment services, or contracts that's promised to the public official or the public official family members. It's a very broad definition. And so when we train on this, we really just say anything of value. You're prohibited from taking anything of value from someone engaged in a general practice or a specific situation involving the city's decision-making or permitting process, unless you fall within an exemption. And exemptions include entertainment, hospitality, which includes meals, transportation, and token mementos that are directly associated with events that you are attending as a representative of the city. I put that in quotations because it's also not defined. There are going to be situations where it's very clear that you're attending an event as a representative of the city. There are going to be situations where it's very clear that you're not attending an event as a representative of the city. Then there are all those events that are in the gray area in between. So if you get a gift and you think it's permissible, meaning it's not coming to you from someone engaged in a general practice in front of the city or that has a specific situation, any specific situation pending with the city, and you wish to accept it, and it's not an exemption, doesn't fall within the exemption, then you have to declare it pursuant to 14-135 within 5 business days of acceptance, unless the code provision does not require reporting. And the code provision that's referenced in your ethics code is 14-135. It's another code provision that applies to gifts for city officials, mayor and council member, and city employees. So this one applies to everyone. The following reflects legitimate public duties or purposes and are not considered gifts that must be declared. Events sponsored or funded in whole or in part by the city. Reasonable hosting expenses for official speaking engagements or ceremonies or appearances on behalf of the city when a public or civic purpose is served. You get a little more clarity there about when you might be appearing as a council member on behalf of the city, but it's not crystal clear what would fall into that and what would not. Gifts of goodwill or tokens of appreciation accepted on behalf of the city, food accepted and shared with others, and gifts received and donated to charity. So you never have to insult anybody by declining a gift. You can take it and give it to charity. There are also additional prohibitions that are found in 14-135, which again apply to the council and city employees alike, and board and commission members. The council is prohibited from soliciting items of value for personal benefit, from accepting gratuities, tips, honoraria, or payments for your official duties. You're prohibited from accepting items that could reasonably be construed as an attempt to exert improper influence or as a reward for an official action. So, what changes would you like to see to gifts, if any? Should we merge the 2 code sections on gifts into a single code section in the ethics code? It has caused some confusion in the past to have two different sections in two different places. Another question I have for you is, should personal gifts, such as those given from family members or close, longtime personal friends, be considered a gift that must be declared? Does the city want to see declarations on those types of gifts? Should reasonable hosting and hospitality for any event where a public or civic purpose is served be exempt? Or do you want to see gift declarations when a member of council or a board and commission member is attending those types of events and accepting some reasonable hospitality at them? Should the number of days to complete a gift form be changed? Remember, it's 5 days from acceptance. It's not 5 days from the event. If you've accepted a ticket to go to the event, you may not even know whether or not you're going to attend before those 5 days expire. Should the $25 value change? That was written into the code many, many, many moons ago, when $25 got you a lot more than $25 does today. Or any other thoughts that you may have about changes to the gift section?
You took a breath, so at this point, I appreciate
always
that.
interrupt me, Mayor.
I have a call to speak from Councilmember Durham, then Councilwoman Whitehead, and Councilwoman Janik. So Councilman Durham and Whitehead, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. As I read this, if we meet with somebody who regularly does business with the city or is in the practice of it, and they give us a cup of coffee and a cookie, that's not allowed.
That's correct.
It seems to me that that doesn't make any sense for the same reason we've talked about before about not insulting someone. If we're meeting with somebody at their offices, not in a public place, but if we meet somebody at their offices and they offer us a cup of coffee and a cookie or something like that, I don't think that should be covered. So I think possibly sort of a de minimis exception for people doing with the business with the city might make sense. I would merge the definition, the gift with the rest of it, as you've suggested. On the relatives, you're talking about a relative who is doing business with the city, receiving a gift from a relative who is doing business with the city?
I think if the relative was doing business with the city, then you would probably have a conflict of interest and
Right.
you couldn't participate. But if it was a distant relative or a close friend, maybe who does regularly practice in front of the city, seems to me like that still might be prohibited. But it's just something that the council needs to think about right now. Currently, the way we interpret that is under section 14-135. It involves gifts that you take in your official capacity, that you receive and take in your official capacity. And we have always interpreted a gift from a family member to be in your personal capacity and not something you're getting as an official, so it's not something that would require a gift form, and it's certainly not something that you would have to decline. But that has been raised about whether or not that's the correct interpretation. It has been raised before, so I think it deserves some clarity. Keep in mind this section of the ordinance applies to city employees as well as the council and board and commission members. You can imagine what would happen in the city clerk's office if all of us had to declare any gift that we received over the holidays that's more than $25 in value. It's just simply not the intention of that code provision. But when we get to the enforcement section of the ethics code, I will go over with you and you will find out that it's a panel of independent judges that make those decisions, and they don't really look to how we train on these ethics codes. So I think it behooves the council to make it as clear as you can.
Well, it seems to me if there's a gift from somebody who has an interest in business before the city, and if it's from a relative or a close personal friend or something, it seems to me that ought to be allowable, but it could be cured by filing a certificate form, right?
If that's the way you want it to be, yes. We could write that in. But right now, the declaration is only required, and it only helps if it's a permissible gift. You cannot legitimize an impermissible gift by filing the gift form. So right now, if a council member had a family member who regularly practiced at the city of Scottsdale, they would not be able to accept a gift. If they wanted to make sure that they stayed out of trouble with the ethics code.
And I guess that would not be a conflict of interest because if a person doesn't have a direct interest in the business that person is pursuing, it wouldn't fall under the conflict of interest provisions.
It would only fall under the conflict of interest provisions if that relative were bringing a matter before the council, and it would then trigger a conflict of interest. But conflict of interest and gifts are completely separate. So I would expect this council not to vote on any matter that their relative had, as defined by the state conflict of interest laws, had a financial, direct or indirect financial interest in. That, I think, is easier for the council to wrap its head around. It makes sense.
Right.
But when you're talking about accepting gifts and you have personal lives as well as professional lives, sometimes those lines get a little more blurry. Perhaps not to me, but again, I'm not the one that's going to be interpreting this when and if an ethics complaint against the council comes forward. And that's why, because it's been an issue that's been publicly debated and questioned, and in fact, a prior ethics panel has commented on the lack of clarity between the two code sections here, I think that we should endeavor to clarify it. I hear you suggesting that there should be some exemption for friends and family in your personal capacity, provided that they're not regularly practicing or in the city with a specific situation that would come before that body.
Well, I think that's the situation we're in most of the time. If you get a gift from a friend or a relative and they don't have anything pending before the city and they're not in the normal business of having positions before the city, that seems to me that's not an issue at all, I don't think. But I'm just thinking of a situation where someone might have a friend or a relative, although relative is a little bit easier to deal with. Friend gets pretty broad. So I'm always in favor of more transparency and publication of the interests. Possibly we could solve that for relatives, but not for friends. The one other thing I also have is on 14-135E. I would like to make that within 5 days, within 10 business days of receipt instead of acceptance. I think that might make it easier if we're tying that to receipt rather than acceptance. And we're now doing that electronically. And so this may not be necessary, but we could add that the declaration shall be made on a form designated by the clerk and can be communicated by electronic means, just to remove any doubt that the electronic forms the clerk is using now are legitimate.
We could do that.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Continuing the conversation, Councilwoman Whitehead.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with Councilman Durham. I'd like to merge the two sections for gifts. Reasonable hospitality, I think, I think that if we're going to a chicken dinner on behalf of the city, we shouldn't fill out forms. I think that saves taxpayer dollars and staff aggravation and time. So I would like to say reasonable hospitality. When you are being invited as a city council member and probably called out as a council member, we shouldn't consider that a gift. I like the ideas of extending. I'm not sure if I understood Councilman Durham correctly. I think it should be 10 days, just to give people an opportunity to not break any of our ethics code. 10 days after the event or receipt of whatever it is. I like the 10 days and then not from acceptance. I'm cool with getting making it $50. I think $25, $50. I think most of us just don't accept anything. I like the idea if sometimes you do get people purchase coffee for you before you get there. So if we can have some kind of leeway there. And it seems like you have the relative thing covered. I mean, if you have a great uncle that suddenly gets you a gift and he's coming before city, I think that they should declare it. It seems like you have that well covered, but nobody should be declaring gifts that they're getting from their family otherwise or friends. So I think that's where I stand. Thank you.
Thank you. I see City Clerk wants to weigh in, so perhaps you could give us some particulars.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to mention one thing. I do think Councilman Whitehead has a good suggestion about it being after the event, because sometimes the tickets will come in weeks in advance of the event, and the council member might change their mind or might have some type of conflict and then not be able to go to the events. The other thing is that the short time frame now, it does make it difficult on the clerk staff to make sure that is filled out in time by the council member and reported. So I do think after the event, some period of time after the event is very helpful to have that gift declaration form filled out.
Thank you, Clerk. Also, I think perhaps for clarity, if there is an appearance on behalf of the city, that I would suggest be calendared. That's a very useful way of saying, in many cases, I mean, I see the ones that come to the mayor as invitations, and I don't know all, or it may say mayor and council, and I don't track, other council members, but it does become a question of quorum sometimes. Perhaps too many of us may be seated at one table, and so it would be useful to calendar that, and then if someone sometimes drops out or finds they're available, sometimes they're filled by a staff member or some other opportunity. I see Councilwoman Janik and Councilwoman Littlefield.
I think everything I was going to say was covered by Councilwoman Whitehead, and I agree with what she has proposed. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Littlefield.
Yeah, I would like to say the same thing. I had a list of things, and basically Councilwoman Whitehead said them all, so I agree with what she said. I don't think I need to repeat them. And I also, I think that the suggestions that Councilmember Durham and Councilwoman Whitehead said about raising the value amount to $250 from $25, it just keeps the inflationary values to the same amount that it was. So I agree with that also. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just cover one detail. I see Vice Mayor Caputi, just so I don't forget this thought, you just buzzed in. We are a community property state, and that means some of us have spouses and so forth, and in most cases, the invitation comes to myself, and through the office, I see an invitation, and my spouse is not Joanne Lane and may or may not want to go to the particular event. And there is a stack of receipts at the clerk's office. In some cases, we choose to buy her ticket for that my spouse's ticket. In other cases, when they're on invitation, of course, I calendar it. And this relates to just the friendliness of the community, nonprofits, whatever's going on. And just to make another point, at times, of course, the city will buy a table. And in that case, it's pretty clear if that table is offered to several of us who may be council members, and at some point that number drops down and depending who's in town or whatever, and a staff member, or there may be 2 tables the city buys. So there's some clarity in that sort of purchase and participation that's also pretty much done. Okay, moving on to Vice Mayor Caputi.
I agree with most of the comments that have been made already, and I don't know if this is the spot where it would be inserted, but I've heard from several constituents about the need to put somewhere in this ethics code that we not be allowed to accept anonymous gifts. And as I read through this, I didn't actually see it listed anywhere, and I do think that's fairly important in an ethics code, that we list somewhere that we not be allowed to accept an anonymous gift. So again, I don't know where it would be inserted, but I would just like to see that in our code. I don't think there's ever a reason. I can't imagine a reason in which it would ever exist that we would be able to justify receiving something that the public wouldn't know where it's from.
Thank you. Yes, we've prepared that amendment before, so I know exactly where to insert that. And can I follow up on your comment, Mayor? So is the direction from the council that you would also like to exempt reasonable hospitality for a spouse attending an event where a civic or public purpose is served, or just for the council member themselves?
I think, again, it's clear, and yes, it is on record that when 2 tickets are offered, whatever fair value is stated, and that's very useful. Again, we're a community property state.
Good.
And that's the way these galas and so forth tend to be presented.
Very good.
Okay, one more comment, and then we'll go to the next subject. Councilwoman Whitehead.
Should we just say date, not spouse? Is that possible? Whoever, if you're given 2 tickets, I mean, I'm not trying to split hairs, but I just don't know if we want to say spouse or just
spouse or companion.
Thank you.
Can do that.
Thank you. Next portion of your presentation.
Open meeting law, I'm going to touch on this very briefly because I think the council knows the open meeting law very well. But just to remind you, all meetings of any public body shall be public meetings, and all people so desiring shall be permitted to attend and listen to the deliberations and proceedings. The public policy is that the business of the public should be done in the public. And even though some limited communications outside of a meeting are not a violation, some limited one-way communications and limited communications between less than a quorum, the Attorney General's office strongly recommends, and remember, he's the one that investigates open meeting law violations, that members on boards, commissions, and other appointed advisory groups are encouraged to communicate about city business at open public meetings. I'm going to quickly touch on undue influence on subordinates. Both the city charter and your ethics code provide that the city council may make inquiries of staff, but not interfere with the city manager's authority The Ethics Code prohibits orders or explicit directions or requests publicly or privately to any subordinate of the city manager. It prohibits influencing the city manager on hiring or firing. Again, the council can ask questions, but you should be careful here and try to direct most of your inquiries to the city manager or his direct staff. So do you have any other changes to these provisions or any other updates you'd like to see or anything additional to these provisions in the Ethics Code that you would like to see added?
I see no hands at this point. Councilmember Durham.
On this SRC 2-54, it says we may make inquiries, but prohibits requests. And I'm not sure what the difference is between an inquiry and a request. I think most of us, or at least some of us as a matter of course, have directed questions to staff that below the city manager and don't always include the city manager. If we have a quick question to say, could you provide me with this piece of information? I think that's something that most of us commonly do. Where I'm certainly not directing anybody or giving directions or anything, but it seems to me that a request is not that different than an inquiry.
Yes, I think what that's intending to solve and where it gets difficult is if a council member not knowing what the work plan is for an employee or what they have on their plate goes up to an employee and says, let me inquire about, just bouncing off a prior conversation we've had, how many conflicts of interest have been filed by board and commission members, and how many recusals. And I'd like to see that in a report before the council meeting on X, Y, and Z over the last 5 years, because that would really help me decide how I wanted to vote or handle this item. Well, that's an inquiry, but it's also a request that's probably going to take a great deal of time for that employee. You don't know what that employee is charged with doing, and they're going to feel a great deal of pressure because you're a council member to get that done for you. So that's the kind of request that should be directed to the city manager to see if he can direct a member of his staff to pull that together for you in an appropriate time frame. But if you go up to somebody and ask a simple question, you make an inquiry and they can give you the answer just right there. There's no problem with that. They're not going to feel unduly influenced or overly burdened by your request. So I think those are those two different situations.
Councilwoman Littlefield.
Thank you. I just had a question as I read this through. I know that the city manager hires most of our employees here at the city, but also the other charter officers have hiring and firing capabilities also. So does this include under, as an assumption, the other charter officers also?
We should probably clarify that it does. I think we interpret it that way, but it almost always falls within the city manager's umbrella when the board and officials are making inquiries of staff, which can cause some upset or some problems. But yes, I think logically it would extend to the other charter officers, and I can certainly make that clarification when we bring this back for council action.
I think that would be good. Also, when I first got on board, and I haven't heard it since, and just this whole discussion just brought it back to my head because I hadn't thought about it. There was somebody who told me at the time that, yeah, you can ask for something, but it can't take more than a couple of hours for a staffer to do. And they had a definite number, but I don't remember what the hours were because I never did it that way. So I didn't, was that just real or made up?
I think it's real. I have the same memory. I believe it's in your council rules that you can ask questions, but it shouldn't take more than 8 hours. And if it takes more than 8 hours, it requires 4 members of council to direct staff in that regard.
Okay, thank you.
My singular comment is how staff manages and handles a question from any one of us. And I want to commend the way it's handled because I think it's related to open meeting law as well. So there's not an attempt to broadcast a bit of information among ourselves, but the respondent, a staff member, might say, oh, so-and-so, or I have had a request from a council member, not necessarily who, but or so, and just to fill you in, you know, this is a frequently asked question, and I'm able to provide that. I commend that. I think it's important. Another way that I see that, again, in a good management, at times I commend the auditor because she has the file. You know, several of us have been in office 11 months and 12 months, and it's very useful to call upon when I ask for or say, what was the last audit on such and such? Well, it may be 4 years old, it may be a year and a half old, and I think that information is certainly on the website, but that's certainly available and it's very prompt. I appreciate that also from the clerk's office when some information as to improvements of that and the order of information. I think that's very useful in our commitment to be transparent to the public. And so continuing on, I see no other hands up. We'll continue with the discussion.
Very good. Thank you, Mayor. The last section in the Ethics Code is enforcement, and I think this is the section that is most in need of updates. Because again, when the Ethics Code was first adopted, nobody really knew how many ethics complaints we were going to get. And although this has caused some discussion, the Ethics Code, we don't get that many. We don't get very many ethics complaints, which is great. But the Ethics Code does state what is required if a complaint comes in. They cannot be anonymous complaints. You have to have the name of the complainant. They have to state a violation of a mandatory provision of the Ethics Code. They have to state the facts that they're basing their allegation of an ethics violation on. But they can just say, I believe these facts to be true, and sign an affidavit to that fact. So sometimes the folks sending in ethics complaints don't really know, they're just assuming what the facts are. They can attach documents and witnesses, and their affidavit, again, must allege a violation of a mandatory provision. There is a time period in the Ethics Code. It can be for a violation that allegedly occurred no more than 365 days before the complaint comes in, and no more than 90 days from the time that the person complaining learned about the matter. So the earlier of those two things. And I don't really think there's much of a problem. I'm going backwards. Much of a problem with what is required to be in the complaint. I'm sorry, I've lost my place here. So there's two different tracks of an enforcement process, one for boards and commission members and one for council. Let's start with the first one for appointed board and commission members or task force members. Complaints about your appointed public officials are reviewed by the city attorney. The city attorney can dismiss it if it's incomplete or doesn't state a proper violation. Otherwise, the city attorney must themselves investigate the allegation, prepare findings of fact and conclusions of law, and make a recommendation to the council in a report that becomes a public report. And the council must consider that public report at a council meeting. And if they find an ethics violation, they may remove the public official from office. I think that process works fairly well. Although if the city attorney does find that there is no ethics violation, you still have to go through the public report and the city council meeting, which can be difficult for that public official. And then we have complaints about council members. When a complaint regarding a council member comes in, it must go to an independent ethics panel. First, we are required to keep 10 to 12 contracts for independent ethics reviewers at any given time of retired judges or legal faculty with ASU or U of A. And it's not any retired judge, it's retired state or federal judges. So it's a pretty high bar. If there's not enough judges or faculty to serve in this pool of 10 to 12, we can go outside of that, but at least 2/3 of the pool must be judges or faculty. They cannot be residents of Scottsdale. They cannot have regular Scottsdale work or work for Scottsdale clients. They really have to be extremely independent of Scottsdale in order to qualify. I only have 7 to 8 contracts right now. It's nearly impossible for me to keep 10 to 12 judges or legal faculty on file to serve as independent ethics officers. And one of the reasons for that is we so seldom have an ethics complaint. So they go through the process of having contracts and doing all of that administrative work, then they get no work. They have nothing to do. So if the complaint comes in, I then have to immediately transfer it to the independent ethics officer. I name an independent ethics officer annually from the pool of individuals that are serving as independent ethics reviewers. That ethics officer will conduct an initial screening of the complaint and dismiss it if it's incomplete or untimely, or if there's no mandatory violation alleged, and they must refer it to an investigation if it's not dismissed. It's investigated by a 3-member panel that the independent ethics officer selects, and there's no current ability for the independent ethics officer to consider any outside evidence that may quickly dispose of the complaint without the need to send it to a 3-person panel. The ethics panel is to investigate the allegations and make findings of fact and conclusions of law in a report, which again goes to the city council, the complainant, the respondent, the city attorney, and city clerk. That must all occur within 60 days of the complaint, although there is an allowance for a 30-day extension from the ethics officer. And then, of course, the city council must consider the report at a public meeting and accept or reject the report as submitted. The ethics code does allow the city attorney to prepare, it requires actually the city attorney to prepare rules of procedure, which I have prepared to govern the hearing and investigation process. I'm not going to spend the time to go through the details of the current rules of procedure, but they were in your packet if you care to look through them. So, changes to the enforcement section. Should we update the ethics panel membership and ethics officer requirements? Do we need 10 to 12, or can that number be lowered? I can tell you that number can be lowered. I think we just had a few in the last election cycle, and we usually only see ethics complaints coming in during an election year. Does the independent ethics officer need to rotate every year? Just when they get to know the ethics code, they rotate off.
So at this point, I have 3 hands up. Councilwoman Whitehead, then Councilwoman Littlefield. So let's start with Councilwoman Whitehead so we don't get too far ahead in your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Yeah, I like the idea of limiting the pool to make it easier. I also like the idea of expanding the credentials, possibly to county or city level judges. Then maybe look at it again if that's still troubling to bring in. I know there's some discussion about bringing in attorneys. I'm open to that. If that was possibly that we make it majority judges. So I am open to that based on what my other colleagues say. I like the idea of rotating every 5 years. Let's get our money's worth. And there was one other. Oh, that is the one I had. Okay, so yeah, Councilwoman Milhaven knew what I wanted to say. Yeah, I would like to change the initial review part to include considering outside evidence that might cause the first round to just dismiss it before it goes to the 3-judge panel. So yeah, those are all my things. Thank you. Thank you, Councilwoman Milhaven.
Thank you, Councilwoman Littlefield, and then Councilmember Durham.
Yeah, basically, I had much the same issues and suggestions that we do cut down on the numbers of panels that you have on retired judges and faculty, and consider outside evidence that I think makes sense, and no reason to keep these folks on a string there. We're not going to use them, so thank you.
Councilmember Durham, and then Councilmember Milhaven.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd be fine with lowering the members in the panel to 6, maybe. I'm not sure. I'm sure you know a better number than me, but seems like 6 is probably more than enough. I would try to keep as many judges or faculty as possible, just because I think that they might be better judges. I'd be fine with rotating the officer every 3 years or so. And when you talk about outside evidence, does that include a response by the, I guess it'd be a council member in this point? So when you say...
It would be. And yes, I think it would allow for a council member to say, let's say you were accused of accepting a gift, or let's make it more simple. You were accused of not filing a declaration after accepting a gift. And you did file the declaration.
But right now you can't, yeah, so I would definitely allow the possibility of a council member filing a response and then giving the ethics officer the ability to dismiss the claim based on that.
Right. It would be like an informal version of a preliminary dispositive motion.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, Councilmember Milhaven.
And then on slide 29, it says City Council considers a report at a public meeting. Do we have to do that, right? If the panel finds that there was no violation, then do we still need to do it in a public meeting? Because, you know, my concern is people may use complaints to try to embarrass people. And if there's no foundation for the claim, I don't know that I want to give people an opportunity to publicly embarrass people where it isn't appropriate.
Correct.
So could we narrow it and say it would only be reviewed at a public meeting if there was found to be a violation?
Certainly. We could write that in if it were found to be a violation, and then I would write it in under both boards and commissions as well as the council.
Thank you.
Okay, I see no other hands on this issue, and we'll continue. Thank you.
That was the end of my presentation, Mayor.
Okay. Well,
Thank you.
Well, I do have one question as to whether this takes the place of our yearly ethics and training requirement, because it seems as though we've withstood quite a few details here. We look forward to the, yeah, you are amazing, and we get individual briefings. Just to clarify again, the onboarding for certainly council members and commissioners is very thorough, in my opinion, and I believe that the yearly requirement is also standard. So I look forward to the other points to be discussed. I see no other points. We are therefore concluded. And do I hear a motion to conclude?
I move.
Move to adjourn. Second, all in
second.
favor? Aye. We're done.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.